Hello! Welcome to the Noesis Guide for Choreography and Source. In this tutorial, we will teach you how to use the software development kit for the Source engine to animate your own movies. And one thing I should clear up right away is that this guide is meant to complement another one we're releasing called Source Machinima Cinematography. Both of these guides are about making machinima, but this one is focused solely on animation and creating scenes inside the game. The other one focuses on all other aspects of production, like writing, filming, editing, etc. So I hope you bought the right one. The other one is more fun than this one. It covers a lot of guidelines and more topics. This guide is the harder one, but it will teach you how to really use the engine to create scenes and animations, which is no small task. Okay, I imagine you know this if you bought the guide, but it's worth going over what the word machinima actually means. It's not in the dictionary. I'm not sure what the origin is, but I've heard it's a combination of the words machine and cinema. There's also some dispute about the definition, but I'm going to define it as movies made using a game engine. In this case, we're using one of the best, the Source engine by Valve Software. This is one of the best engines you can use for creating your own custom content. Most other games that you can modify require a bunch of third-party software in order to do much with them. With the Source engine, it includes a software development kit. This really opens up your options without having to learn a lot of other software. In this guide, you'll be able to learn how to create scenes inside the game, add props and characters, create animations for your characters, learn how to move people and objects around, create facial expressions, do lip syncing, and a few other miscellaneous things. Now the people at Noesis said I should tell you a little bit about myself in the introduction here, which I took to mean as explain why you're qualified to teach this guide in the first place. Well, my name is Ross Scott. At the moment I work doing various odd jobs and by doing contract work like this. I've been working with the Source engine since 2006, so that hasn't been a very long time, but I've definitely put in a whole lot of hours in learning it and using it since then. The reason I'm sitting here narrating this right now is because I used the Source engine to create my own machinima with it. The main series I've been working on is called Civil Protection. It's a comedy series that takes place in the game Half-Life 2 about some of the law enforcement officers. This has gotten more publicity than I ever expected, and it's also doubled as a portfolio for me, which is why Noesis contacted me about making this guide. Today I'm up to my neck in the Source engine, so I'm going to do my best to pass some of that knowledge on to you. One thing that you might find interesting is that I started to make movies in Half-Life 2 not because I'm a die-hard Half-Life fan with the lambda symbol tattooed on my forehead, but because of the engine. I originally just wanted to have two faceless guys having funny conversations, and researched what the best game was for that at the time. Well, once I started fiddling with the tools available in the software development kit, it was really a no-brainer. I mean, a lot of games have good map editors out there, but Half-Life 2 is the only one I came across that would let me animate characters without having to learn serious modeling software like XSI or Maya. While the series is still evolving in terms of what I can accomplish, between these two guides from Noesis, you'll know everything about the Source engine I did and more when I made my first episode of Civil Protection. It took me quite a while to learn enough of the software development kit just to get started. I had to scour the far corners of the internet and ask a lot of questions to find the information I wanted. If I had had a guide like this when I was learning it, it would have literally saved me weeks of time. And to prove to you that you can really make machinima with this guide, we've also worked to create a short feature for you to go with it. It's called Galaxy Gulp. It's a comedy with a few skits in a very random environment. The prompt for this video is that since Noesis had produced several other guides, we wanted to show off some of the models from their previous ones. Unfortunately, they were so different from one another and had no one single theme that it was tricky to find a setting for them that would make sense. So the end result is pretty strange, but that's the idea. We're going to play this video next. Just watch it and enjoy it for now. Then when we come back, we'll discuss how this ties into the rest of the guide.
I rushed in there and sold all 8,000 shares before midday trading. Less than 3 minutes later, the NASDAQ showed a 48% drop. I made out like a bandit.
Jeez. Man, I just can't handle the swings the way you do.
But that's where the money is. You can't make anything if you don't put it in.
But the way you do it, one mistake, you've lost your retirement fund.
Don't listen to John, he's a psycho. All you have to do is just pour the money in when the tide's rising.
Oh, come on. All you're doing then is fighting inflation. What kind of yields is that bringing you?
I got about 6.5 last year.
6.5? Oh, give me a break. My grandmother makes more of that from her bingo game.
So, you ready for dinner tonight?
Frank, I can't do this anymore.
What are you talking about?
I think it would be best if we stopped seeing each other.
Wait, what?
It's not working out, Frank. I've been trying to make this relationship work, really, I have. But it feels so draining.
You're dumping me? Why?
Frank, I don't know how to put this. You're so hollow.
What about you, Fred? What's your investment strategy?
I just put my money in the bank.
Oh, the bank!
Well, where's the fun in that?
I don't know. I think you guys are nuts.
Maybe. But at least we'll be rich nuts.
Hey, how do you guys drink these sodas?
I knew this would happen. It's those guys down at the gym where you work out, isn't it? Suddenly I'm not enough. You need a macho man now. Well, let me tell you something. Those guys don't have half the bone structure I do.
No, Frank, this is what I mean. Your personality.
I've got marrow in these bones, baby.
Frank.
So was it yours?
Oi! I got him picked up with the pound. And we're gonna put the poor fella to sleep.
Well, he looks pretty friendly.
Oh, but he can be a handful, have no doubt.
So what do you do for a living?
Oh, mostly freelance work. Right now, I shoot myself out of a cannon when the need arises.
Did you say you shoot yourself out of a cannon?
Aye.
Doesn't that hurt?
Aye.
Somebody call the police! A fight's broken out!
Well, good chatting with ye, but duty calls. Hey, somebody's gonna have to pay for this.
That dwarf did it! Get him!
Beat the big gorilla!
Okay, hope you enjoyed the movie. The reason this was created was to show you how all the techniques that are going to be taught here can come together to make something entertaining. So throughout this guide, we're going to be referring back to this movie constantly to illustrate different techniques. Now we're not going to cover this 100% because a lot of the scenes are redundant as far as what you can learn from them with the engine. On the other hand, we'll be straying from the movie a little bit in areas because we'll have more to teach you than what is present in the movie. So at the end of this guide, you won't be able to recreate the entire movie, but you will have learned the exact same techniques to create your own. Also, I don't know what the box to this is going to say, but this guide is designed for use with the game Half-Life 2, especially Half-Life 2 Episode 1. It has some updates that make it useful for Machinima. Also, you can try using the Source SDK base, which is a free download with Half-Life 2, but last time I checked, the entity used to create fire in the game would crash it, so maybe that's not the best idea. Unfortunately, each version of the Source engine has its own quirks and glitches that you have to work around the best you can. Now you may have some luck using the game Half-Life 2 Episode 2, but not only was that game not out when production was started on this guide, but I've personally seen some bugs related to that version of the engine as far as camera work goes. While that's beyond the scope of this particular guide, we just want you to know why we'll be using Half-Life 2 Episode 1 for this tutorial. After you have a Source engine game, you're going to have to install some software before we get started. If you want to have lip syncing capability, you're going to need the Microsoft Speech Software Development Kit. It's easy to get. Open up your web browser and use a search engine like I have here. Then type in Microsoft Speech SDK and press enter. And it's the first entry here. You can see I already clicked on it earlier. Now scroll down a bit. It will give you a description of what it does. And the file you want is Speech SDK 5.1, so download that. Then wait on my internet connection. There we go. And tell it to open, and when it finishes, the rest of this should be pretty simple if you've ever installed anything in Windows. You know how it goes. Next, next, I agree, stop bothering me with these prompts, next, finish. Okay, now the other piece of software we're going to need is to install the Source Software Development Kit itself. To get this, go and open up Steam. I'm in offline mode so people won't bother me, and so Steam won't try and pull a fast one and update the SDK on me while I'm trying to teach it. If you don't have this, you'll need to be online though. Okay, so go over to Tools, and the program you're going to want is Source SDK. If you haven't installed it, this will be grayed out. All you have to do then is right-click on it and install. If you don't even have the option to download it, that means Valve wants you to buy one of their games in order to join the club. If that's the case, I recommend getting Half-Life 2 Episode 1. It has some good updates in it, relatively few bugs, and costs $10, I believe. Alright, assuming you have the SDK installed, just double-click on it or right-click and launch the game. And it's going to take a second or two to load. And if you see this, you're set. Now for the engine version down below, make sure it's set to Episode 1 and not the orange box. We're not officially supporting that in this guide because of the bugs present in it. The good news is if the bugs ever get fixed, then almost all of what you learned here will carry over to that version of the engine. And finally, the last thing you need to do before you can use this guide is to copy some files over in order to follow along. I recommend opening 2 copies of Windows Explorer like I have here. Now I have to record this before everything's finalized, but I'm told that the first directory we'll be copying from is going to be Machinima Choreography with the Source engine, like you see here. And the place we're going to be copying files to is your game directory under Steam. By default, that's going to be the C drive, Program Files, Steam, Steam Apps, your Steam username, and if you want the best results with this guide, install it to the Half-Life 2 Episode 1 directory, then Episodic. If you only have Half-Life 2, you'll still be able to follow along with almost all of this guide, but some of the custom model content may crash on you when you run it in the game. The techniques will all be the same otherwise. If you're copying to your Half-Life 2 directory, then this will be Half-Life 2 with the subdirectory HL2. Okay, now go to the first window here and you'll see we have 2 subdirectories, Files Created and Files Needed. Files Created are copies of the files that were created in the process of making this tutorial. They're just there if you want to take a look at them for yourself. Files Needed, however, isn't a bluff. We really need those files, so double-click on that directory. Now highlight everything in there and just copy it over to your game directory. And you may have some of the same folder names like I do here. That's alright. This shouldn't overwrite anything important. You'd have to have something like your own custom sound scripts in here before it would. If you do though, you may want to back up anything you've created that you think could overlap. And that's it. Now you're set to run the guide. Now the way this guide is going to work is that we're going to cover one concept with the engine at a time. So if you want to make your characters walk, we have a section just for that. I highly recommend going in order, because a lot of the lessons build off of one another. The format of this will just be me explaining what's happening, following along with the video footage showing you what to do. So if you can't stand the tone of my voice, then you may be out of luck. I can do different accents, but not for hours at a time. The tone of this video is going to be very informal. I frequently make my own personal comments about what's happening in the video, and occasionally some jokes to liven it up a little bit. I won't lie to you, this stuff can get pretty dry, so you were warned. Also keep in mind this was made over a period of time, so the tone of my voice may change a little bit from lesson to lesson. It doesn't mean that I've been replaced by clones because the original Ross Scott tried to escape and had to be killed. It just means my voice isn't the most stable element on Earth. Okay, I think that covers everything. Let's get started.
Welcome to the tutorial for the program Hammer. In this first lesson we will learn the definition of pain.
Just kidding, that's for later. We will be learning about the program Hammer though. It's one of the first things you want to learn when making Machinima in the Source engine. Hammer is a map editor, but it controls how a lot of other things operate inside the game. We need it because in a movie sense, this is how you build and manipulate your set. So go ahead and launch it. Now the first thing I want to explain is that this will not be a comprehensive mapping tutorial. It will cover only the bare bones to get you started in Machinima. The maps we'll be using in this guide have already been created ahead of time. The Source engine is very complex, so we can't cover everything. If you want to learn more about Hammer after this guide, Noesis has another tutorial devoted specifically to this one program. It's that deep. Yeah. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do is close this message window, since at this resolution I need all the room I can get. You don't have to worry about that. And while I'm on the topic, if your interface windows on the right here look different from my screen, that's okay. They can get moved around from dragging them or sometimes from resolution changes. Next, let's open one of our already made maps. Go to File, Open, and Basic 1 is going to be the name of this. Now you can store your maps wherever you want. I'm putting them in the Episode 1 directory for sake of organization. We'll cover this again later, but by default that's going to be in C, Program Files, Steam, Steam Apps, your Steam username, Half-Life 2 Episode 1, if that's what you're working in, Episodic, the Maps. Then Open. Now your screen might look like this, but there's a decent chance that this screen here will be black. To fix this, go and click on the camera icon here. And then click and drag it here, pointing towards the wireframe lines. Now that didn't seem to do anything on my screen, but if you're having problems, that should take care of it. Now once you can see a preview of the map in that window there, go and click on the Select Tool icon here. This lets you select any entity you see in the map. Any entity. Now once you've done that, let's cover navigation. Go and look at the arrow keys on your keyboard. Depending on the window you're looking at, this will control left, right, up, and down. It's the magic of 3D. If you want to move forwards or backwards, use the mouse scroll wheel. And if you want to get crazy and strafe around like you do in the game, just press the WASD keys. This is another way to move forwards and backwards. Most of the controls work on the wireframe previews in a similar way as well. So you can zoom back and see the whole map, or you can come back in. Now this map is from the Galaxy Gulp video, but it's a very stripped down version of it. We wanted to keep it as simple as possible to start off so things aren't too confusing. Now let's learn a little bit about what we're looking at. This green guy here is an entity called an Info Player Start. You can see the name of it down here. Wherever you place him, that is where you're going to start when you run the map in-game. You need to have one of these or else the map will create one for you, and then you're taking your life into your own hands. So they're important to have. Let's look around some more. You might be wondering what this black bar is in the background. It's not an ominous monolith like in the movie 2001. It just means that this area is so far back that it's not being rendered. If we move forward, you can see how it disappears. Now this blue stuff here might look like the sky, and really it is the sky in a way. It's called a skybox. When you click on it, you can see the different faces of it and realize it's just a giant cube. In fact, let's move forward a bunch so you can see a close-up of this. Zobjects. Wait. Skybox! This is a texture you can add, and what it means is that in the game, whenever you look at this, you'll see the sky, which is in our case a field of stars. Okay, let's come back. Here you can see the asteroid like in the opening video. Let's cover another entity. This one looks good. This is a light environment. We're not really going to mess with this, but if you double click on it, you can see its different values, like brightness, ambient light, etc. What this does is that for any scene that takes place outdoors, like this one, this determines how much and what kind of light will cover everything. A normal film director would call this the sun. Now as a director, you do have to pay attention to lighting, but that can get so complicated, it's better left to a mapping tutorial. We're just trying to get you started. Alright, let's see what else we can cover. How about this? Do you see these blocks here? When you select one, it just says solid with 6 faces. All it is just a block. It's what makes up your map for the most part. Now map people call these brushes. I don't know why. I guess, I don't know. Moving along, let's look at some more entities. This here is called a shadow control. This controls all the real-time shadows you see in the game. Your characters and some objects use these. If you click on it, it just says what direction the shadows are coming from, how long they are, what color, etc. Again, more stuff to learn in a mapping tutorial. This here is the fog control, which controls the fog as you probably guessed. We don't even have any fog in Galaxy Gulp, but I threw it in here because sometimes I've seen strange things occur when you don't have it, like the real-time shadows won't always show up. As long as you set the values farther than what you can see, it's like it's not even there. Okay, let's cover another tool. Go ahead and click on the camera icon here. We used this earlier. This is a lot like the select tool, except it's only used to look around. If you hold down the left mouse button, you can look at things from any angle. It's useful if you want to get a really close-up view in the editor. Like, pretend there was a tiny bug crawling around on this windowsill here. This would be a good way to see it. I use this every now and then, but for the most part it's more useful to stay with the selection tool. And that pretty much covers what you're seeing so far. We'll learn more as we go, but for now let's go ahead and see what this map looks like in the game. So go to File, and then Run Map. Now this part is very important. Let's look at these different options. Run BSP is what creates your map. I've never found a reason to run it on anything except normal, so leave it on that. Run Vis, this is pretty important. The best way to explain what this does is that it does a lot of calculations to determine what can be seen from where, and helps optimize your map. However, if you use Source Recorder, you really don't have to worry about your frame rates when making Machinima, so optimization is not much of an issue. You can usually get away with Fast or None. If you select None, you might run into problems for certain situations, like if you have water in your map, but Fast runs very quickly and helps iron out most problems. Now if you select Normal, depending on your map, this might take forever to finish. Hours, days. So don't select that unless you really know what you're doing. And if you do, you're probably not listening to this part of the tutorial anyway, so it's all good. Fast or None should work fine. Now Rad, this is something you use towards the end of production, right before you're ready to start filming. We're not going to use it right now. What this does is figure out all your complex light calculations. I find Fast isn't that fast. It can still be pretty slow. So it's usually best to go with either all or nothing. If you go with Normal, it can take a while to calculate, so don't use it unless your lights are already set up. Right now, ours aren't. So if we were to run this, it would make the whole map very dark. We won't cover on how to set up lights here, but we will have lights to work with later on. For now, we're just going to click on None. This is all you need for making previews of your work. The lighting won't look so good, but hey, it'll run fast. The HDR option stands for High Dynamic Range. This can work either way with Machinima. This is useful if you want your light sources to really bloom in your face, but it will also change your light exposure settings on the fly, which can create problems for filming. We won't be covering it for the sake of this tutorial. Finally, some people run into problems if they run the game immediately after compiling, especially if you don't have much RAM. For me, it's not a problem, but if you don't want it jumping right into the game after the map is ready, check this box. Alright, now we'll click OK and see what our map looks like. This box here you can check later. It gives you messages that are useful in case something crazy happens. Now let's take a moment to reflect as we stare at the Tower of Impending Doom. And here we are in the game. Now the first thing you'll probably notice is the plain lighting everywhere. This is called overbright mode because there's no shading. This is the price you pay for turning RAD off, and it's totally worth it for the previews. Now you can look and jump around just like in the regular game here. Woohoo! We can back up to see more. There's our skybox up there, except you can't tell now. And that's about all we're going to do in-game for now, since we're still starting out. There's more about in-game filming in the cinematography module. However, one important thing to know is how to load this map without running it from Hammer, like if you checked that box earlier. To do that, you need to enable the console window. So if that's not set up already, press Escape to go to the main menu, then Options, and Keyboard, Advanced, and check this option here. Then close your windows, and to bring up the console, just press the tilde key. Then to bring up this map, just type map space basic 1. That will reload it. And there it is. So now let's use the console to head back to the magical world of Hammer. Just type in exit. Zwap. Okay, here we are back in Hammer. Now as you can see, this level is still looking rather plain. You have the store here and the asteroid around here, but not much else. So let's learn how to start adding props. To do this, we'll have to use the Entity tool here. So click on that, then notice how this window becomes active. For the category, we want entities. For objects, there's a whole bunch you can choose from here. I don't even know what all these do. But we're going to want props. Even then, you can see there's a lot of prop types here. However, we're really only going to be concerned with 3 of them. The props static, dynamic, and physics. We'll cover them one at a time here. Let's do static props first. Now static props are props that don't move for any reason whatsoever. They may as well be part of the map. Their shadows are calculated like the maps as well. They give off the soft stationary shadows that are done in RAD rendering. So let's go ahead and create one of those. I'm going to make my static prop one of the lampposts you see in the video. That's about right here. If I click here, you can see it's created a cube, which represents the prop, so we'll still need to define it. So click on the selection tool, then double click on the prop. And World Model is the category we'll want here. So select that, then browse. Now as you can see, there's a lot of props to choose from. This is one of the great things about working in Half-Life 2. You have all these props to work with. It's still loading them, there's so many. Okay, yeah, we don't want that. That would be a little crazy, but let's go and search for the one we're looking for. I'll type in lamp for lamppost, and there it is, the one that says lamppost on. And you can right-click on the preview to zoom in or out, or left-click to rotate it. The one thing you want to check is the Info tab. Notice how it mentions those 3 props I was talking about. Static, dynamic, and physics. Now what these checkboxes mean is that this model is configured to be either a static or dynamic prop, but it cannot be a physics prop by default. But we just want a static one anyway, so we should be good. So go ahead and click on OK. Now click on Apply and close the window. And we have a lamppost. Now in the movie it's more at an angle, so I'm going to go over to the top-down view here. Click once on the prop and notice how it brings up these circles? Click on one of them and hold it down and it allows you to rotate it. There, now it's looking more like the one in the video. So now that we have our lamppost, let's make a dynamic prop. Now dynamic props are like static props except that they can move. They can play animations and can also have what are called parents. They can attach to these and then they'll move wherever their parent does. The cups you see the soldiers holding in the movie are a good example of a dynamic prop. Those are a little more complex than what we're covering right now though, so we'll come back to that later on in the tutorial. Also, dynamic props have their shadows cast in real time, like your characters. Now for my dynamic prop, I'm going to create the APC vehicle you see parked in the video. That'll be pretty easy. So select the Entity tool, then go to Prop Dynamic. Click there, go to the Select tool, then double-click on it. We want World Model again. Oh, and here's the parent value I was talking about earlier. But for now, just click on Browse. And this time we're searching for APC. And there it is. Now notice here in the info, the only option checked is Dynamic. This is good because this is what we want, but if we wanted this to be a static prop, it couldn't. It's just not an option. Now we could make a static prop with this in the editor, but as soon as we tried to run the game, it would disappear. So these values really are important. So click on OK, then Apply, and Close. Uh-oh. Now he's double parked. That's a bad example to be setting for a soldier or a cop or whatever. So let's double click on that and fix it. We can change the angle in this window here. So let's turn it 90 degrees. There, see, that's better. I guess he's still kind of taking up both parking spaces there, but it's a wide load vehicle, so we'll cut him some slack. Now even in that overbright mode we use for previewing, this is still going to cast shadows because they're done in real time. So we'll look for that when we run it. Dynamic props use dynamic shadows, a wild concept. And this prop can move around, but it's just going to sit there for the time being. Now let's create a physics prop. Now a good example of a physics prop in the movie are those bags of chips you see flying around everywhere when the dwarf crashes into them. Now physics props are props that behave like real-life objects. They can get tossed around or bumped into, and the game engine will do all the math and figure out how they should move. It can lead to some very believable physics interactions, which are handy for a lot of things. It's great. So let's create one of those. Click on this again, then Prop Physics. I'm being fancy and typing it out. Then we'll create one over here. Then select, double-click, World Model, Browse. This time I want chips. And we'll have to wait for it since it's loading so many models. Now if this doesn't come up for you at all, it means you didn't copy the model files to the right place and you'll have to go back to that step. Now one neat thing about this model is that you can actually pick a skin for it. So you can have different textures for the same thing to spice things up a little. Now let's check our info and uh-oh. It's saying that this model will only work as a dynamic or a static prop, but not a physics one. Denied. Well, fear not, Mouseketeers. There is a way. Go ahead and click on Cancel, then Cancel again, then select this prop and delete it. Now go back to Entities and select Prop Physics Override. We're saying, no way, man. We want a physics prop. We're putting our foot down. So double click on that, browse again, we're still in the hunt for chips, and still waiting for it. Yep, just waiting for it. There it is. Now it still says it's incompatible, but that's alright because we're overriding that. Making the rules and breaking them. Now this override function will also work on dynamic props, but not static ones. Another thing to keep in mind. Close that window, and now we have our bag of chips. Now since this bag can get knocked around, why don't we go ahead and show it in action? I'm going to move it so that when the map spawns, it'll fall down right in front of us. So let's go ahead and move this over. And move it up a little bit so it's floating in the air like it's possessed. And when the map spawns, this bag of chips is going to fall down right in front of us. And while I'm on the topic, say you didn't want it to fall or wanted to wait for it. You can do this by opening the property window again, then click on Flags, then check Starts Asleep. Then it won't move until something bumps into it. But I want it to move as soon as it starts, so I'm not going to do that right now. Now we have some props, let's start adding some characters. The easiest way to do this depends on what's available in the game you're running. There are going to be some models that already have game code to go with them, called NPCs, which stands for non-playable characters. Since we already have some for Half-Life 2, let's use those. I'm going to add those Combine soldiers you see in the video standing around talking about stocks. So head back to the Entity tool, Now there's a lot of NPCs, but the one we want is NPC Combine S, which stands for Soldier. I think there were 5 of them, so let's go ahead and add them here. And now let's rotate them so they're all facing each other. And you rotate them the same way as props. You know, making this tutorial reminds me of the late artist Bob Ross, who would show people how to paint on TV. And he would often talk about painting things like happy trees and happy clouds and mountains and things. So I guess these are your happy soldiers of oppression. There, now it looks like a huddle. Now if you've played the game Half-Life 2, you'll know that the Combine soldiers are not really your friends. So wouldn't it be great if they didn't try to kill us as soon as the map started? Why don't we work on that? First of all, let's take away their guns. They don't need those. Hold down your control button and select all of the soldiers. Then right-click on the selection here, then click on Properties. And under Weapons we have Submachine Gun. Yeah, I don't think they need those. So how about nothing? That's a good start. Alright, hit Apply and Close. Now when we come in, they won't have any guns. However, they're still going to hate your guts and try to kill you with their elbows or something. So let's take this a step further and create an entity called an AI relationship. Over here, it's up at the top. Click on that and create one of those. Then go back to the Select tool, double click on it. Now in here we have some values we want to look at. The name doesn't matter. The subjects will be NPC underscore Combine underscore S. That will make it apply to all of them. Now click on Target next. The target in this case is you. Not that guy with the axe standing right behind you, but you. So to tell the computer this, we type in exclamation point, then player. Now the next is disposition. They like you, so that's good. But just so you know, your other options are hate, fear, and neutral. I haven't noticed much difference between like and neutral. I'm guessing it deals more with subtle expressions than some of the NPCs. Either one will be fine. The next value we want is Start Active. Select Yes, otherwise this isn't going to do much for us. For reciprocal, now they like us, but do we like them? That's really the question, isn't it? I'm going to leave our options open and say no. Then if our actors frustrate us, we can shoot them. Normal film directors don't have this luxury. Regardless, this is useful if you have 2 characters you want to like or hate each other in just one step. Now when we enter the map, they're going to like you and not try to kill you. Isn't that great? Let's cover one more thing here. As you can see, these are all just generic guys, the entity NPC Combine S. But say we wanted to make one of them distinctive. So I'm going to select the name and call this guy Bob. So now this is Bob, but these other guys are just generic people like you see every day. And if we go back to this AI relationship for a minute, click on the subject. And instead of typing in NPC Combine S, we could just type in Bob and that would work too. We're not going to do that though, because then everyone except Bob would want to kill you. So that wouldn't be a big improvement. But this is handy to know, especially when you get more characters on the screen. So that should about do us for now. Let's go ahead and save this. So go to File, Save As. I'm going to call this one Basic 2 since we've made a few additions to it. Then once you've saved that, let's go and run our map. Be sure to check your vis and rad. Make sure they're not on normal. Okay, looks like I'm going to have to talk about something while this is loading. Let's see. Did you know that there are about as many ants as there are people mass-wise? What that means is that for every person on Earth, there are enough ants to match them in terms of weight. So if you weigh 200 pounds, somewhere out there, there are 200 pounds of ants waiting for you. Oh, did you see the chips fall there? Looks like it worked. See? It slumped over and everything. There's our lamppost, and there are our soldiers, none of which are trying to kill us. And there's the shadow for the APC, although it looks like I messed up in the editor and it's frozen in the air. But that's okay. This is a perfect example of why we turn RAD off to make previews. We run them quickly so we can spot errors like this and fix them, as opposed to waiting 10 minutes for each one. Okay, looking good. Well, now we have a map, props, and characters. Let's learn how to animate them in the next section. Okay, now in order to animate your characters, we're going to have to learn the program Face Poser. Don't let the name fool you either, it does bodies too. So let's go ahead and start that. And while that's loading, I want to go ahead and show the animation we're going to be learning from the video. We're going to start off easy, don't worry.
So is it yours?
Oi!
Did you catch that? All we're going to be doing is animating that robot thing in the background saying his one line. We're not going to focus on the dwarf right now because he's, short. Now, the people at Noesis made it pretty clear that I shouldn't call that guy a robot. He's actually supposed to be called a Turbo Chi. I didn't ask why, and it's probably best if you don't either. Okay, back to Face Poser. Now, if this is your first time running this, it probably doesn't look like my screen. You probably have windows all over the place, like this. Yeah, see, look at that. It's a mess. Now, some of these we'll use later, but others you may not need, like expressions. I have a bone to pick with expressions. I'll talk about that later. Close it for now, along with the rest of these windows. We only want 3 windows open right now. 3D View, Animations, and Choreography. Choreography you should give plenty of space. It's going to be your timeline for everything you do here. So unlike me, if you have a nice big monitor, go ahead and give it a bunch of space. Now, let's start making our scene. Go up to the top and press on the Choreography menu. Click on New. And here we want to pay attention to the directory structure. For a normal Steam installation, it's C drive, Program Files, Steam, Steam Apps, your Steam username. Okay, now I'm working in Half-Life 2 Episode 1. This folder is going to be whatever game you're going to be working in. So Half-Life 2 is just going to say Half-Life 2. Below that it says Episodic. For Half-Life 2 Regular, it's just HL2. You can usually figure it out depending on what game you're running. And finally below that is Scenes. You'll probably have to create this folder on your own, but it needs to be there because this is where the game will look for all your scene files when you try and run them back inside the game. Okay, once you're saving to the right directory, go ahead and give it a name. I'm going to name it something original like Face Poser 1. And your next prompt is Create Actor. Now I don't want to incur the wrath of Noesis, so I'm going to go ahead and name this that Turbo Chi name I talked about. Now what that's done is create an entry in the Choreography window which will sync up with an entity that has that same name in Hammer. We'll come back to that later. Now the next thing we're going to do is create a channel. This is kind of like a folder for the actor to keep things organized. So we're going to go ahead and right-click on the actor name, go to New, and then click on Channel. I'm going to go ahead and call this Audio because your actors never really shut up and will come to haunt you with their voices. Now once that's done, go right back to that general area and right-click on it again. We're going to go ahead and create another channel just to stay organized. I'll call this one Animation because that's the whole point of this exercise. Alright, now we have our choreography set up, but we need to see what's happening. Right now we're like a blind man in a dark room at midnight looking for a black cat that isn't there. So let's go down and right-click on this bottom blank area here and click on Load Model. This is going to show you the folders for all the models in the game. We want to go down to the one that says Turbo Chi Animations. Now if you're looking here and you can't find it, that means you forgot to copy over the files we discussed earlier. Shame on you. You lose this round. You have to go start over and then come back to this. For all the cool people who did their homework, go and double click on the folder, then select the Turbo Chi model. Open that and it'll load up pictures of the model. Now your screen probably doesn't look like this. The background to your model is probably black. This can make it a little bit harder to see the model. What I like to do is get this kind of gray background you see here. In order to get that, go down to the Control Panel tab at the bottom here. Right-click on that and then click on Show. Once that comes up, check the box that says Ground, and it'll render a background for you. Now close that and... stop moving. There we go. Alright, now you may have noticed this guy isn't framed up so well. All we have is his head in the bottom half of the window here. In order to change that, we're going to want to go up to Options, and then click on Center View. And that will... Oh, beautiful. Okay, yeah, that's exactly what we want. A crotch shot there. Let's fix this. Go and right-click at the top of the preview window there, and just drag it down. You may have to do this once or twice. There, that's looking better. And if you want to get them at kind of an angle so you can get a better view of them, left click towards the center, hold down the left mouse button, and then you can rotate him. Yeah, see now you can see what he's doing. Alright, so now we have a timeline set up, a 3D preview of the character. So the next step is to add in that line you heard earlier. To do that, we're going to go down to the choreography window, then right click in the channel that you want the audio, which is audio. Then a menu comes up and you want to go up to WAV file. Click on that and you'll get another menu letting you pick which sound file you want. Now as you can see, there are way more sound files here than you want to spend your time searching through. As luck would have it, I named all the sound files for the Turbo Chi with the prefix TC then a hyphen. So go to the filter window and type in TC hyphen. Ah, see now it's only 5 files. We can handle that. The line we want is "So is he yours?" And there it is. And it's worth mentioning that in order for a sound file to show up here, a script file has to be associated with it, which is already included in the necessary files. Unfortunately, the process of creating a sound script is not covered in this tutorial, but is in the cinematography one. You can still add custom sound files by placing them in the sound subdirectory of your game folder, but then you'll have to type in the name manually in the sound field below. And before we can add this, we need to give it a title, so I just title it the line, "So is he yours?" Okay, now you'll see a bar in your choreography window which represents the sound file. Now if you don't see this, that means you're missing the sound file, which means you're going to have to go back and copy those files over. Also, if you didn't see the sound file entry back when we were picking it out a few seconds ago, that means you didn't copy over the script file. Now I'm mentioning all this because even if you did copy over all your files, this can be a very common mistake when you're making your own custom content. Either you didn't copy over the script file, or there's a mistake in it, or the sound directory's named wrong. That's all stuff to check for because I've seen that happen a lot with beginners. Okay, let's go play the sound file and make sure it works. Just press the play button.
So is it yours?
Sounds good to me. If it sounds choppy on your machine, don't worry about it. It'll be fine for in-game. The one thing you may wonder about is this text below the block that represents the sound file. That's just for subtitles, so you don't have to worry about that unless you're making a mod or something. For Machinima, if you're going to have subtitles, that's better to take care of during the editing process. So don't worry when you just see these X's everywhere saying files are missing. Alright, one thing that's good to know is that any file on the timeline can be dragged around like so by clicking on it. This changes at what point the file will play according to the time markers up at the top here. Alright, now another important thing to cover is notice that the file is a few seconds in now. Whenever you press play, it goes back to the very beginning and starts there. See? Watch.
So is it yours?
That's no good, because as your scene gets longer, this becomes more of a problem. So the way to get around this is to right-click in the blank area towards the top there, and then it'll make a green triangle marker. Now when you press play,
so is it yours?
It starts from the green marker. Also, you can create a second one if you just want to play a select area, like this.
So is it...
See, it only played that segment. Just right-click again to create a new one. And if you want to get rid of them, just left-click somewhere in the blank area. Okay, now we know how to use sound files. Now all the animations for each model are stored within that model itself. If you want to see all the ones available, that's what the animation window here is for. Now as you can see, there's a whole bunch for this one because it contains many animations from Half-Life 2 characters as well. They share the same skeletal structure, but that's an advanced modeling thing that we're not going to cover in this tutorial. For our purposes, you're pretty much stuck with what you have. To see what an animation looks like, just click and hold the thumbnail and it will be displayed in the preview window. Now like the sound files, there's more than you really want to search through here, so in order to find the one you're looking for, go to Search, and all the animations that are used in the movie will have the prefix Turbo Chi. So type that in there. And now there's only 9 to choose from instead of 196. So the one we want is Turbo Chi, is he yours? Which kind of sounds like a sales slogan, but we'll go with it. Now go ahead and click on that, and drag it to the animation channel. Then click OK. And you have to give it a name, so just type the line, so is he yours? If you want to be a rebel, you can type something else, but whatever. Okay, that's created an animation bar there. Now if you click and hold this green thing, you can scan through the animation. If you want to sound like a pro, the green thing is called a scrubber. I don't know why, it doesn't wash anything. Now, as you can see, when the audio starts and when the animation starts is a little off. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust that until it matches up.
So is it yours?
Looks pretty good. Now let's play it real time.
So is it yours?
And it works. I'm starting to notice, I guess this guy isn't a robot after all. He has green hands and neck. I guess he's a reptilioid or something. So, now we have a working animation. What's the next step? Well, first, let me show you one very useful feature here. Say you want to zoom in or zoom out on your time scale here. All you have to do is hold down the control button and use your mouse wheel. Now, what I'm about to show you I don't believe is needed for episode 1, but it is needed for Half-Life 2. So I'll go ahead and show you how to do it. So go ahead and right click in the empty space here at the beginning and go up to null gesture. And just press OK. And if you click on the end here, you can shrink the length down. You can also do what I'm doing to animation files, but you have to be careful because it can mess up the timing. Now this doesn't really do anything, but what I've found is that in Half-Life 2 regular, if you don't have this, what will happen is that it starts playing your first animation in slow motion, no matter where it is on the timeline, as soon as your scene starts. So it'll screw up your timing if you don't have this. Whereas if you do, then everything plays the way it's supposed to. So either way, it doesn't hurt anything. You won't be able to tell the difference here, but you sure can in-game.
So is it yours?
Okay, now we have a working scene file. Just don't forget to save it. Go up again to Choreography, then click Save. And now we're going to head back to Hammer and see what this looks like. Here we go! Here's Hammer again. I believe the Norse god Thor had a magical hammer. However, we're not Norse gods, so we're going to have to use this program instead. Okay, let's set up our map to run our scene. Go to File, and let's open Basic 1 again, just to keep things simple. Now there's a couple ways to run this scene file. This one in particular is special because it uses a custom model, the Turbo Chi. There are at least 2 ways to handle this. I'm going to cover them both. The first method we're going to learn about is using generic actors. These are like the name says, generic actors. As you can imagine, these are very useful for Machinima, except they don't always work. But for now, let's assume they do. So go over to the Entity tool, click over on Objects, and Generic Actor is the entity we're looking for. This is going to be our actor. So go ahead and place him on your map. He's about right here. Wait, no, he's behind the curve, so let's move him. If I haven't mentioned this already, you can take any object in Hammer and move it around by pressing Ctrl X and then Ctrl V, and it will drop it on the first object it sees. It's like cutting and pasting files in Windows. And notice he's just a cube. We still have to define him. Cubes are one of the lowest forms of life in the 3D world. They all aspire to become a highly detailed model with lots of vertices and faces. So let's double click and help our cube achieve that dream. Now go down to Model, then Browse, and we want Turbo Chi. There he is. This will make our cube so happy. So click OK, then go to Name. Okay, what do we put for the name, people? Say it. I can't hear you. That's right, Turbo Chi. If I have to learn it, so do you. Now apply, then close. And ta-da, there he is. Now he's confused and is looking the wrong way, so let's rotate him towards us. Remember how to do that? Click on him in the top-down view window here, then drag those circles in the corner. Now he's looking about right, but we still need a way to tell him to perform his scene. There's a couple ways to do this, but I'm going to cover one of the most straightforward ones by creating a trigger. To create a trigger, I'm first going to have to create a brush. Those are those blocks we talked about earlier. So go over to this button here. It's what will let you create brushes. Once you've clicked on that, go over to your top-down view and click and drag the mouse over an area. See? Notice how that made an outline of a cube? Now press Enter. Now we have a brush there, though it's still not what we want yet. For starters, this brush is using the styrofoam texture that's used for the giant cup in the movie. There's actually a texture just for what we're doing, and has trigger written all over it so we don't get confused. So let's change it to that. Make sure the brush is selected, then click on this colorful cube icon here. That's the texture tool. Now click on Browse, and here you can view all the textures in the game, but we don't want all this. So go to Filter and type in Trigger. Then select this orange one here. Double click on that, then hit Apply, and close this window. Now you can see it's semi-transparent and says Trigger all over it. However, it's still not a trigger yet, so let's turn it into the real deal. Go and select the brush, then right-click on it in the Wireframe View menu. Then click on Tie to Entity. This transforms it from a piece of the map to an entity that has some sort of function. Here you get to select what kind of entity. We want Trigger Once, though Trigger Multiple will work too. It doesn't need a name. Now hit Apply and close this window. We're going to come back to this in just a minute. Let's move it around here and stretch it out some so it covers this whole parking strip. The trigger itself is invisible, so it's good to have some sort of indicator where it is in the game. Now the way this works is that when you walk into this area in the game, it will send a signal that can trigger different events. The event we want to trigger is that scene file we created for the Turbo Chi. There's an entity that specifically handles this. Wow, try saying that 5 times fast. Anyway, click on the Entity tool, go to Objects, then go to Logic Choreographed Scene. Then just click anywhere to create this. Let's see. Comedy and tragedy, classical Greek stuff. Okay, double click on this with the Select tool, and we really do need to give this a name, so I'm going to call it what? Scene 1. And hey look, I'll even spell it correctly. For the scene file value, click on Browse, and there's the Face Poser 1 scene we created earlier. It's all coming together like some sort of master plan. And hit Apply. And don't forget the name here, we're going to need it in a second. Okay, close, and double click on the trigger again. Then Output. We have a trigger entity, but we still need to tell it what to do, which is what this window is for. So let's click on Add. Now the function we want is onTrigger. This means do something when you walk over it. This section here is a lot like basic programming, where you tell a computer what you want to do based on your input. The difference is we don't have to learn any actual code, so yay. If we did, then this tutorial would never end, and we'd be trapped in it forever. The next part is target entities, which in our case is Scene 1. And really it lists all of them for you here, which is nice, although you usually end up typing this part in, because on some maps you can end up with hundreds of entities. But we only have a few here to pick from, which is the nice thing about keeping it simple. For via this input, we tell this entity what to do. We want our scene to start, so just select that in the menu. And really what you're learning here opens up a lot of options. We could tell it on trigger kill person A, or on trigger make the world end. But for now we just want it to play our scene. And there are other options. If you wanted to delay the action, you can type in how much here. We don't need to do that now, but that can be useful for timing on some events. So click on Apply and Close. Now let's go ahead and move our start position over, so when we spawn, all we have to do is walk forward to start the scene. Remember, just cut and paste. Okay, now in a perfect world, this would be all we have left to do. But remember earlier how I said generic actors don't always work? Well, as luck would have it, this is one of those situations where they don't seem to. But we're going to run this map anyway, just to prove it. And to help win back confidence for anyone who's starting to think I'm insane. Wouldn't be the first time. Okay, we're making progress, so let's save this map. File, Save As. I'm going to call this Generic Actor, since that's the method we're focusing on here. Save. Then once you've done that, let's go and run it. File, Run Map. Looks good. Okay. And now I should talk about something else while we wait for this to load. Did you know that your fingernails grow roughly twice as fast as your toenails? I always thought we kind of got shafted with fingernails biologically. I mean, sure, you need to protect your nerve endings, but they're so easy to bend and break. Have you ever tried playing basketball with long nails? I mean, I think we can all agree that retractable claws are the best, but oh, okay, now watch. I'm going to walk forward and it'll say his line, but it'll completely ignore his animation.
So is it yours?
You see that? I guess he thinks he's too good for this role or wants a new trailer or something. You even have to deal with actor drama like this in the virtual world. Alright, I'm going back to Hammer. Okay, so that didn't work. Now it's time to really get our hands dirty and start making up our own solutions. This is a common situation in Machinima. The thing is, the game was never really meant to be used for what we're using it for in the first place. So you usually have to make up some things as you go. I can't emphasize this enough. So how can we fix this? The generic actor has failed us because he has no soul. But who do we know that seems to have some life to them? Those Combine soldiers, that's who. So let's double click on our actor here. And let's change the class to NPC Combine S. Hit apply. So now we just turned him into a Combine soldier, but we still have more to do here. First, let's disarm him like we do with the others. Go to weapons and take away his submachine gun. And our next step is that we want to make him look like the Turbo Chi. So go to model and, well, whoops. Looks like I get to cheat. Normally this area would say something like regular soldier, but this is actually the path we want because we entered it in earlier for the generic actor. I'm going to go through the steps anyway. I'm going to copy this path so I don't have to retype it, but normally this wouldn't be an option, so let's change it back to soldier. If you created a new soldier, this is what you would see. To change this, we have to do it manually by clicking on Smart Edit here. Turning Smart Edit off is what lets you change the values to whatever you want. It's generally not a good idea to do that unless you know what you're doing. Now see here it just says Models/Combine Soldier. Now I'm going to be lazy and just paste what I copied earlier. But if you're typing it in, it's models/turbochi_animations/turbochi.mdl. Now you can see why I copied and pasted it. We're just pointing directly to the file with the game directory acting as the root directory. So do that, then hit apply, then close. You can see he still looks like a Combine soldier on the screen, but now when we run the game he'll turn into a Turbo Chi. But now he has the mind of a Combine soldier, so we need to make him not want to kill us again. So this is just a refresher. Click on the Entity tool, AI Relationship, create that, open it, subject, Turbo Chi. We could also just say NPC Combine S, but this is easier to remember. Target, exclamation point, player. Disposition, like. Start active, yes. Apply and close. Okay, now let's save this as Turbo Chi test. Save. Now let's run this sucker. File, run map. Okay, what should we talk about this time? Did you know that when Venus flytraps capture a bug, they do so by growing so fast that they trap it? So it actually shortens the plant's lifespan every time it captures a bug like that. That's pretty hardcore for a plant. I mean, that's like if you could run super fast for a few seconds if you took 5 years off your life. That'd be nuts. Okay, let's do it.
So is it yours?
Aha! Success! Now let's go back and uncover more of the mysteries of Face Poser. Okay, so we know how to make our characters play animations, but there's still more to it than that. We're going to expand on that here by learning about ramping and gestures. Let's go and run Face Poser, and while that's loading, I want to show you a clip from the video again. Okay, this is going to happen very quickly, so you need to look for it. Watch the Turbo Chi in the background there after I unpause it. Ready? Here it is. Okay, that was what I wanted to show you. Did you notice how he twitched all of a sudden? You may have to rewind it, but he jerked very suddenly, which doesn't look natural at all. I'd say 95% of the time, this is something that can be fixed. And while I'd like to say this was intentionally put there for you to look at, it wasn't. It's simply a mistake on my part. But since it's already there, why don't we learn how to fix it? We'll cover some important aspects of Face Poser animation along the way. Okay, let's head back. If it isn't already in front of you, go ahead and open up that Face Poser 1 scene. If you need a reminder, just go to Choreography, Load, Face Poser 1, and Open. Now it's going to ask you if you want to save changes to what you were doing. It almost always does that. Just hit No, although it really doesn't matter because we didn't make any changes. Yeah, so you notice that twitch? Alright, well now that that's open, go and click on the tab at the bottom that says Ramp. That should bring up a new window. If it doesn't, then just right-click on it, Then left click on Show and it will pop up somewhere. Once that's showing, go and select our main animation. Now we're set up to use the ramp tool. What the ramp tool does is change the intensity of your animation. Normally, everything's at 100%. This is why we get twitches like we saw earlier. The character will just be standing there idling, then boom, starts to play an animation. So rather than have everything jolt into place, we can use the ramp tool to make things happen gradually, which looks better. That said, the first thing I want to point out here are the time values in these two windows. Notice how the green scrubber for your choreography timeline has a different value than the one for the ramp tool. That's actually a bug. Normally these two values should line up exactly. If they don't, make sure your animation is selected, then just select the green scrubber and move it. Then it will wake up and start doing its job. This is important to remember because this bug happens all the time. So if you don't check to make sure your times match, then your work might end up out of sync. And speaking of times, you can also adjust your time scale the same way you do with your choreography window. Just hold down Control or Alt and move the scroll wheel with your mouse. And if you see that blue line there, that represents the end of your animation, which matches up with the choreography window. Okay, so now that we know what we're looking at, let's learn how to modify this animation. Go to the ramp window, hold down the Control key, then click anywhere in the blank space there. This will create a plot point that the ramping tool uses to shape the animation. Again, it's all about intensity. The top of the window represents 100%, the bottom is 0%. Notice how it's created a curve graph from this one point. What it's doing is averaging all the values. So it starts at 0, then goes to whatever my plot point is here, then goes back to 0 to end it. Also notice how since we have a graph now, it's also represented through a line in the choreography window so you can follow along. And if we scan by the animation now, notice how his reaction isn't as intense. That's because we've toned down everything a bit, but we don't want that. We just want it to fade in and maybe fade out. Now if on your screen the Turbo Chi's feet are awkwardly sliding into position, don't worry about it. That's just the preview being glitchy and using a different idling animation since we haven't specified one. It will use the correct idling animation inside the game. This first plot point starts at about 0.6 or 0.7 seconds, which is about where I want it. So let's just raise it by holding down Control and move it up. Now I want to create a second point over here. You should generally give yourself at least half a second to ramp your animation up or down, but there's no set rule. So if you want Superman busting out kung fu moves, you may want a shorter time than that. But if you just want some guy sitting on a couch yawning, you may want to take as long as a few seconds. It all depends on what you're trying to do. Let's play this back and see how it looks.
So is it yours?
Looks pretty good to me. I think I'll add a few more plot points here just to show you what's possible. Remember, hold down the Control button and click where you want the points to be.
So is it yours?
You can see now it's more irregular. Let's see what it looks like when it's played back.
So is it yours?
It doesn't look quite as good, so I'm going to get rid of these extra points. But what I just did there can be useful for breaking some monotony in animations or manipulating them. Say you wanted someone flapping his arms. If you had an animation with his arms outstretched, you could achieve that by ramping it up and down repeatedly. So anytime you're looking at animations for your characters, try to envision what's possible just by manipulating the intensity. It will give you some more options. Alright, to get rid of these, just drag a square over the points you want to remove, then press delete and they're gone. You can also move multiple points around this way by holding the Control key. Alright, now our animation should play smoothly, but I want to talk about another function before we go and run this. Now what I'm about to explain may be a little confusing, but it's just to give you a better understanding of what's going on. Right now, the animation we've been using for the Turbo Chi is normally what's known as a sequence. A sequence is just a regular animation for your character. It plays and that's pretty much the end of it. It's also a little more forceful and can override other things that your character might be doing. So if your character is walking along in the game and you play a sequence from Face Poser, it will stop him dead in his tracks. Now a gesture is much more flexible. It will play an animation on top of whatever your character is doing and can be manipulated. It can animate the whole body, or it can animate just one part without affecting the rest of it. That's up to the modeler. Now to really confuse things, you can easily convert sequences to gestures just by dragging the animation over to the timeline like I've been doing. So this animation we've been working with is normally a sequence, but we already converted it to a gesture. I convert almost everything I do to gestures because they're more flexible, but I'll show you how to create a sequence in a second too. And you notice in these tabs you have gestures and postures as well. As far as we're concerned, a posture is just another kind of gesture. They tend to deal more with body positioning. If we were making a custom model, then we'd have to learn more, but fortunately we aren't. In this guide, we're only going to be using the animations already included in each model. So on that note, let's go and pick out a native posture instead of a sequence like we did before. I'm going to go with something distinctive. I like this stance. He looks like he's ready to jump somebody. So just drag that to the timeline. Okay, here's what I was mentioning earlier. Notice how it says gesture here. If we were so inclined, we could tell it to turn this into a sequence, like so. Again, the flexibility lost in doing this, in my opinion, isn't worth it. So every body animation you're going to see here in this tutorial is either a gesture natively or is converted to one. I'll show why in a minute here. So go and click on OK. And for the name, I usually just describe what's happening. So I'm going to type stance. Then press enter, and oops. Looks like I made a mistake and put this in the audio channel. Well, since I did that, you can move any event in the timeline from one channel to the other by selecting it, holding down the shift button, and dragging it to another. There, now it's in the right place. And one nice thing about a lot of native gestures and postures is that they're already configured to blend in, so we don't even have to ramp this like we did with the other animation. See? He just transitions to the animation smoothly. One thing you may be wondering is what these blue markers are here. These are timing tags, and we're going to learn how to use them next. So click on the gesture tab here, and that will bring up a new window. And you can adjust the time scale here just like the others. Hold Ctrl or Alt, then move the scroll wheel. Now the way these timing tags work is that they correspond with different points in the animation. The beginning to the apex is the start of it, the loop area can usually be looped, and the end marks the start of the animation returning to normal. Where timing tags get interesting is when you can move them. You can shorten or lengthen any section of the animation, and it will change how it plays back. So say I want him to hold that stance twice as long. I just move the tag over here, and now you can see he's holding it longer. I'll play it back so you can see what it looks like normally. Okay, I'm going to move that back now, but say I wanted him to hold that stance even longer. I can just stretch the animation out. Okay, let's play that back and see how it looks. Now when it plays back, it takes longer, but the only long part is him returning to normal, which doesn't look right. So all I have to do is move this timing tag over towards the end. And now you can see it plays that stance section much longer. However, it does have limits. When you create timing tags, I like to think of the spaces in between them like rubber bands. You can stretch them a good amount, but if you try to push them to outrageous limits, then they figuratively snap. So if you try to stretch what's normally a half-second animation to 5 minutes, it's just not going to happen. I'm not sure why this is, but weird stuff starts to happen if you stretch a timing tag too far. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, remember how I said you can play a gesture on top of what you're doing? Well, let's do that right now, with another gesture on top of this posture. So click on the Animations tab and go to Gestures. I'm going to pick another one that stands out. This one here is good. It's the character putting his hands on his hips. So let's drag that down again, hit OK, and I'm just going to name this Hands on Hips. Okay, I'm going to move this and stretch it out to about the same length. That's good. Doesn't seem to be playing. Oh, no wonder. I put this in the audio channel again. So remember, hold down Shift and move it down here. Now let's play it. Ah, excellent. He has a real John Wayne look to him now. If I could do a John Wayne accent right now, I would, folks. That's the kind of dedication I'm trying to put into this tutorial. Actually, this whole accident brings up something else I should mention. When you have two animations on top of each other like this, Face Poser is normally going to default to the bottom one. The same goes for channels. I think that's why we didn't see the combined animation earlier. The stance animation was overriding the hands on the hips one. Now that it's on the bottom, it's building off the stance and it works. Sometimes it's worth creating an extra channel for your actor just to make sure the right animation is on the bottom. Okay, let's go back to the gesture tool again and do the same thing to this animation. Just move the last two timing tags farther out to stretch it. There, now he's holding that John Wayne pose longer. Now one thing you may be wondering is if you need to fine-tune an animation and there aren't enough timing tags for you. Well, as it turns out, you can create your own. All you have to do is right-click in the area where you want one and click on Insert Tag. It will ask you for the name. I'm just going to call this Test Tag. And there it is. You can adjust it just like any of the others. Alternately, if you right-click on it, you can delete it by clicking on Delete Tag. But wait, there's more! You don't even need to use any of the pre-made tags you're seeing here. You can apply this to any animation if you convert it to a gesture. So let's click on our original animation. Notice how it doesn't have any tags. It's completely blank. Again, all you have to do is just right-click on it and select Insert Tag. I'm naming this Test Tag again. And now you have your own fresh tag. You can create as many of these as you want. I'm going to delete this since we won't be using it, but this right here is a big reason I like to convert everything to gestures. If your timing's off or if you want to fine-tune things a bit, that's no problem. As you can probably tell, this gives you a lot of options. Being able to change your timing on the animation, combined with ramping them, lets you make your own custom animations to an extent. It's not as good as making your own from scratch in XSI, but it's a lot faster and it's easier to learn. And depending on the model you're working with, the Half-Life 2 animations give you a lot to work with already. Alright, let's just play this once all the way through so we know what to expect, then we'll go and run it. So he smoothly starts his animation now.
So is he yours?
Says, is he yours? Goes John Wayne on us. And smoothly comes to a stop. Looks good. Let's go click on Choreography. Save as. I'm calling this something wild like Face Poser 2. Save. And now we return to Hammer to run this. Okay, go to File, Open, and I want Turbo Chi Test this time. Now there's not much we have to change here since we set it up earlier. Once it's loaded, go and double click on the Logic Choreograph scene. Then Scene File, Browse, then we want Face Poser 2 that we saved earlier. Hit Open, Apply, Close, and that's it. So just go to the file again, save as. I'm just going to add a 2 to the end of it. In Machinima especially, it's never a bad idea to give something a different name, even for little changes. That way you can revert back to older versions if you make a mistake. Alright, back to file again. Run map. And OK. Oh, and something you may have figured out, but whenever we run maps like this, I'm actually switching back and forth between recorders. So it's just edited together to look seamless. So if the map view or windows look slightly different before and after these transitions, that's why. It would be great if I could just do this whole tutorial in one shot, but that's beyond my ability. It's like when you go to a rave and you notice some people dancing hard with glow sticks and they keep it up all night without any breaks. That's not natural. It's not that those people have a high endurance, it's that they're on drugs. More than likely some kind of amphetamine, like ecstasy. So I'm not taking any drugs to make this tutorial. Although after staring at all these windows, I wonder if I should. Okay, in the game. Let's check this animation out.
So is he yours?
Nice smooth transition. And a John Wayne pose. Excellent. And now I will magically cut back to Hammer. Ta-da! Okay, now that we have more control over our characters' animations, we're going to learn about making them turn and look the direction you want them to. So let's go to File to reopen our map. And one feature you've probably noticed is that you can immediately open your most recent map files right from the menu here. I want to open Turbo Chi Test 2 here again. You can ignore the others here. One is for another project I had, the other is just a test file I make before recording to make sure this stuff actually works before I teach it. So just click on that to open it. And once that's up, we're actually going to get rid of our Turbo Chi here. These custom models can sometimes get weird with their behavior, so I want to use a model that I know will work correctly for teaching this. So go and select the model here and just delete it. And we're going to create a new character in its place. So go to the Entity tool, and the model I thought we'd use is that guy you see running out of the store saying a fight's broken out. He's straight from Half-Life 2, so everything should behave with him. The entity we're going to want here is NPC Citizen. So pick a spot to place him. I'm putting him in front of the trigger. Then double click on him so we can modify a few things. First, let's change the model so he looks like the guy in the video. To do that, go down to Model. Then Male 7 is the one we want in this case. Then go to Flags and uncheck Random Head. Otherwise, you never know what you're going to get with this guy. He'll be like the 7 Faces of Dr. Lau, for those of you who have seen that movie. If you haven't, it's a classic. Okay, go back to the Class Info tab and go to Name. I'm just going to call him Dude 1. Then hit Apply, Close, and there he is. Though he's still facing the wrong direction. So double click on him again. and change the angle to 90 degrees. Apply, close, there we go. Okay, our next step is going to be to create things for this guy to face and look at. This can be almost anything that has a name, but I'm going to use an entity that is more or less designed to be a target of attention. It's invisible in the game and doesn't do anything by itself. Very unintrusive. So let's go to the entity tool, and I can never remember if these things are called target infos or info targets. So let's find out. Alright, target info. I'm not seeing it. It must be info target. Yep, there it is. So select it and start placing these around our guy here. I'm going to have to zoom inside the trigger box to do this front one. Now these four I'm going to have him face, and I'll have two more for him to look at towards the sides here. Now that we've done that, we need to go and name all these things. I'm just going to name them relative to his position. So double click on the first one here. I'm going to call it rear since it's behind him. Hit apply, close, then let's do the next one. This one is to his left, so I'll just call it left. Oops. You can see Hammer is trying to guess what I'm typing. I think it must be referring to this door over here. Just give it the right name. And actually, you may have noticed I've been telling you to hit apply, then close for just about everything we've been doing so far. That's probably more just a habit of mine than anything actually necessary. There may be some situations where it doesn't work, but for the most part you can just close the window and it will apply your settings. So I'll try and do that. And let's do the same for the rest. Double click here, name it right, and then we'll just close this window. Okay, double click. And this one is going to be a target for him to look at. So I'm going to call this head left. And apply. I meant not to do that. Oh well. Close. Double click again. And see if you can guess what I'm going to type for this one. Head right. And close. And for the last one, we'll have to zoom inside the trigger again. And front. Hey, no, not front window. Front! I'm hitting apply so it doesn't try to pull another fast one on me. Okay, now where's that front window? I'm curious. Nope. Aha! That's what I was referring to. Okay, one more step before we head back to Face Poser. Go and hold down the control key and select all of these targets. Once you've done that, go to one of these side views here and move all these up to about eye level. Now we won't be looking at the ground when we tell him to look around. Okay, go to File, and I'm going to save this as something new. I'm going to call this Look Test. Save. And now I'm going to close this and head back to Face Poser. And here we are, back in the program for the posing of faces. Though we still haven't gotten to that yet. Look at this guy, he doesn't even have a face. It's disgraceful. Alright, let's go to Choreography and click on New. I want to create a brand new scene for this. Save changes? No. I'll name this Face Poser 3 so we can get a franchise going. Press Enter. For Create Actor, our name is going to be Dude1, what I called that guy earlier. Now we're still using the Turbo Chi model in the preview here, but that's okay. Nothing we do in this section is going to be seen in Face Poser. It's all going to be in-game. So we'll be operating a little bit blind here, but I'll help guide you through it. This is also known as dead reckoning. Like when pilots fly at night without using instruments. It makes them hardcore and will help you build character. Okay, do you remember what our next step is? Go over to the actor name and right-click on it. And we want a new channel. And the name can be anything. I'm just calling it animation again. And for the Half-Life 2 people, we're going to right-click here and create a null gesture. You may not need it, but it won't hurt anything. Click OK. I'm just going to adjust it here, but really it makes no difference, so I question why I'm even doing it. Alright, so the first thing I want to show you is how to make our actor look at something. It's pretty easy. All you have to do is right-click in the blank space somewhere, then click Look at Actor. Now you can ignore most of these options. There are easier ways to adjust your settings than here. But we do want to give this a name, so I'm just going to call it Look Left. And for Look at Actor, here's where you type in the name of what you want them to look at. If you select the drop-down menu, then you can see you have a few more options. Most of these are more useful for making an actual mod than Machinima. All these target 1, 2, 3, 4 options are just a redundant way to do what we're already doing, so we're going to skip that. Looking at the player might be useful for you, though you have to remember that the player is the cameraman. Looking at self can be useful if you don't want your actor to rely on idling animations and look around. If you tell him to look at himself, that's like giving him a digital lobotomy or putting him in a trance. He'll behave if you do that. But right now, I'm just going to type in the name of that info target we created earlier. Head left. So click OK. And notice when I go through the timeline here, his head isn't going to react at all. But the function will still work in the game, so don't worry. Alright, now if we play this, we can see this is only going to last half a second, which isn't very long. So let's stretch this out a couple seconds so we can see what's happening. And unlike gestures, there's no limit to how long you can stretch out your look at function. So it's just however long you need it. Alright, that looks like a good length. And the next thing we're going to want to do is ramp this, like we learned earlier. Otherwise his head will snap into position like a chicken or something. Our dude is not a chicken. He is a dude. So click on the ramping tool and create a point by holding down Control and clicking. I find a good ramping time for looking is about 3/4 of a second, but it's up to you. And since the end is a little over 1.5 seconds, I'm going to create another point so we can transition out smoothly. Now when this plays, he should look at the target we created, then transition out of it. Let's go and make one for his right side, except this time let's cheat. This is already a perfectly good look sequence here. So let's just select it, right-click, and click on Copy Event to Clipboard. You can also do this by pressing Ctrl-C. Then right-click somewhere and click Paste Events. You can also do this by pressing Ctrl-V. Notice it remembers the timing info too. This technique can be useful for transferring events between different scenes as well. Now let's slide this over. Now he's set to look left twice in a row, so let's change that by right-clicking on it, then click Edit Event. And for the name, I'm changing this to Look Right so we don't get confused. And for the actor, just change it to Head Right, then press OK. Now he's going to look left, then look right, and we didn't have to change much at all. That's about all there is to know for telling your actors where to look. Remember, they can look at anything with a name. So let's learn about turning next. It's not much different. Right-click on the blank space again, and this time go to Face Actor. You can tell right away, this looks pretty similar to the Look At command. So for the name, just type what you're doing. I'm going to tell him to turn around. And for Face Actor, we type in the name of what we want him to face, which in this case is rear. And you might notice this option, the Lock Facing. We're going to come back to that in just a second. For now, just ignore it. Now click OK. And the same rules apply here. I'm going to stretch this out a little bit to give him time to maneuver. And we're going to want to ramp this again. 3/4 of a second should be fine. And we don't even need to ramp the end of this. The reason being is once he's done, he'll already be facing the right direction, so there's nothing to transition. So I'm just dragging it to 100% there. Now after he's done turning around, I want him to face us again. And again, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel here, so I'm just pressing Ctrl-C to copy this, then I'll press Ctrl-V to paste it. Drag it over here, then right-click on it and go to Edit Event. And here we don't even have to change the name since he's just turning around twice. But we do need to change the actor name, this time to Front. Now let's learn about that option box we saw earlier. I'm just going to press Ctrl-C and copy this facing animation again. Ctrl-V to paste, and slide it over some more. Then right-click on it and click on Edit Event. And this time we do want to change the name since I'll be doing something different. I'm going to call this Twist Left since that's what it'll be doing. And now we check this box that says to Lock Facing. What this will do is cause his feet to stay in place, but it'll twist the rest of his body to try and face the actor you want. And finally, for the name, we'll put Left. Then after that, we just go and click on OK. And because he won't be turning his legs to the same position for this, we should ramp the end of this animation. So go and click on the Ramp tab, and I'm going to select this end plot point and move it back roughly 3/4 of a second. Now it's a nice gradual slope. And as you may have guessed, I'm going to hit Ctrl-C to copy this, and Ctrl-V to paste again. Slide it over. And again, right-click on it, then click on Edit Event. Now you should know that I asked the guys at Noesis if I really needed to repeat every little command like this if I've already gone over it before, and they said yes. So that's what I'm going to try to do. I guess they figure people might skip straight to this, like someone flipping channels on a television. Who knows? They're my boss for this. I guess we all need some sort of boss, otherwise we go insane with power. Okay, so click on that, and this time we're going to change the name to Twist Right, and the actor to Right. Press OK, and that about does it. So let's go over this briefly. He's going to look left, then look right, then turn around again, twist left, twist right, then do the hokey pokey, and that's what it's all about. Alright, let's go to choreography, save. Now let's close this nightmare and move on to the next. We're going to make a quick stop back in Hammer, then run this. Okay, back in Hammer. Fortunately, we don't have too much to do here. Just go to File, and I'm quick loading our look test map here. Let's back up a little bit. The first thing I want to do is point to our scene file. So double click on our Logic Choreograph scene, then go to Scene File, Browse. There's Face Poser 3. Hit Open, Apply, Close, and let's back up some more. Remember, by using Ctrl X and Ctrl V to cut and paste, I'm going to move our start position back a ways. I could explain why, but why don't we run our map first and I'll explain while it's loading. Then I'll talk about something actually relevant instead of nature facts. How about that? So go to File, Save, back to File, Run Map, then hit OK. The reason I moved our start position back is that I want to make sure our NPC doesn't get distracted by us. There are some commands to do that which I'll cover in a second, but by default, when you load up a map, they'll sometimes run up to you and say, "Well, hey, it's Gordon Freeman! I'm coming with you!" And nobody wants that. I mean, I even remember in the game Half-Life 2, turning a turret gun on my own squad so they would stop following me and acting like a bunch of groupies. Anyway, if we don't start off so close to him, he'll chill out a bit, which will give us time to type in our commands. Okay, the game's up. The first thing we want to do is press the tilde key so we can bring up the console. Then type in SV_cheats space 1. This stands for server cheats on, which lets us enter in the commands we need. And the one we want is no target, which will make everyone ignore us. Okay, so hit tilde again, and walk forward to start off the sequence. Here we go. He's looking to his left, his right, turns around again, twist to his left, twist to his right. Looking good. Oh, and notice he's still moving his head a little bit. That's just from idling animations, and what you're able to fix by telling the NPC to look at himself. Alright, that concludes this segment. Now we'll learn all about moving your characters in the next one. Now we're going to learn about making your characters move. And by move, I mean walk, run, fly, whatever. So far, all the animation we've learned still makes them stay in the same place. I'm going to cover 4 separate ways of making your characters move. One of them can be even used on objects. There are even more ways in this of getting your characters to move, but these should be all you need from Machinima. Alright, the first method uses Hammer and Face Poser. All the others are in Hammer. Either way, we need Hammer, so let's go and run that. This first method I don't even use anymore, but I have in the past and it's arguably the easiest one to learn, so it's worth teaching. Okay, go to File, Open, and we're going to start fresh by opening Basic 1 again. So open that, and for our character animation, I thought we would show that civil protection officer walking in the background of that opening scene to the video. He walks at a slightly diagonal angle towards the entrance to the store. Now we don't have the gas pumps here yet, but again, let's keep things simple. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is move our start position so we can see him better when he walks. So remember, Ctrl X to cut, and Ctrl V to paste. And to rotate them, I'm going to double click on them, then move this little dial here, then hit Apply, and Close. Okay, that's about the right spot. Next, let's create the officer. Go to the Entity tool, and the entity we want is NPC Metropolice. And click about right here to place him. I work with these guys a lot on another one of my projects. Okay, double click on him, and let's rotate the angle on him a little bit. Next, we need to give him a name. I'm just going to call him Cop since they're the cops in Half-Life 2. And I think that's it. So hit Apply, then Close. Now he's looking the right way, but like the Combine soldiers, we need to tell this guy not to hate us. So go to the Entity tool again, and we want another AI relationship. You are now a relationship counselor for artificial intelligence. So double-click on it. The name doesn't matter. The subject is cop. The target is player. Disposition like. Start active yes. Apply, then close. Alright, now that we've done that, we're going to create something for him to walk to. So go back to the Entity tool, and we're going to use that same entity we used for turning, a target info. An info target. There we go. Now I'm not going to place this too far away because this only works within a certain range. The online documentation says the target can only be 576 map units away. That's going to be the case with about every method shown here. Okay, double click on the target to give it a name. I'm just going to call this Move1. Apply. Close. This method of motion is going to use a scene file, so we're going to need a logic choreographed scene again. So go to the Entity tool and select that. Now double click on it. And I'll just call this Walk Scene. And the scene file will leave blank because we haven't created it yet. Now hit Apply, then Close. And on that note, let's head over to FacePoser to do the other half of this. First, let's save our map. Go to File, Save As, and I'm going to call this Motion 1 since this is the first method. Now save, close, and go to FacePoser. Now you may wonder why I'm doing this instead of opening up both programs at the same time. I'll say from experience, you vastly lower your chances of the program crashing if you only run one at a time. Okay, let's create a new scene file. Go to Choreography, New. And we'll break the trend here and call this Motion Scene. Save. Our actor name will be Cop, since he's the one doing the moving. And as always, right-click to create a new channel. I'm calling this animation again. It doesn't matter what you call it. And creating our motion sequence is pretty straightforward. Just right-click here and click on Move to Actor. Now the name can be anything. I'm calling it Walk. For Move to Actor, this will be the name of our target, which is Move1. And this next option here is what kind of motion you want. I'm just going to have him walk. And for stop distance, this is the distance from the target that you want him to stop. We don't need that for what we're doing. For forced short movements, this means they'll slow down a bit as they get closer. That might look better in some instances. Now for this option, one of the biggest problems with this method of motion is that you don't know how long it'll take your character to get from point A to point B. So this will actually pause your scene until he reaches his destination. It's a good idea in theory, but I find it sometimes causes jerky animation leading up to and after it, so I don't recommend it. Alright, go ahead and click OK. And again, we don't know how long this sequence will take, so you'll have to guess. I'm going to guess around 5 seconds. If you overshoot, it's alright. He'll just stop once he reaches his destination. If you aim too low, he'll stop before he reaches his destination. And that's about all we have to do here. So click on Choreography, Save. Then we'll close this and head back to Hammer. You know, I've heard from someone who works in a biology lab that men have more in common genetically with male apes than they do with women. I haven't verified that though. Okay, back to Hammer. Just go to File and Quick Load Motion 1. Now the first thing we want to do is point to our scene file that we've created. So go and double click on our Logic Choreograph scene. Then go to Scene File, Browse, and we want Motion Scene. Open, Apply, Close. And now we need to create a way to activate this, so let's create another trigger. Click on the Brush tool, then go to the top-down view here to create a cube. I'm going to stretch this one a little bit. Now press Enter, and next we want to go to the Texture tool. Click Browse, and type in Trigger. Double-click on that, Apply, Close. Now select the brush and right-click on it in the wireframe view, and select Tie to Entity. And we're going to change this to trigger once. Hit apply. And we want to add an output. So click on add. And we want on trigger. Target entity is named walk scene. Via this input, start. Hit apply. Close. And I'm going to move it forward a tad just so he doesn't trigger it by accident. And now File, Save, File, Run Map. Hit OK. Do you know how when you're growing up, you lose your old teeth as your permanent ones grow in? Well, that could be any given day in the life of a shark. They're constantly growing new teeth. They have 5 to 15 rows of teeth per jaw. How many rows of teeth do you have? That's right, 1. Sharks pretty much know what they're doing. They're insanely successful as a predator and are way older than the dinosaurs. They're older than cockroaches. So you talk about a species that's in it for the long haul? There you go. Unless we kill the oceans, they'll probably be here after we're extinct. Alright, let's watch him walk. Yeah, he's walking like a champ. Now, if your guy doesn't start walking, you should double check to make sure all your names match up and make sure the distance between the cop and the target isn't too far away. Okay, this concludes method 1. Let's learn about the others. Okay, the next method we're going to learn lets you create your own path for the character, and it's my personal favorite for use in Machinima. So to start off, let's delete the things we don't need. First, we can delete this logic choreograph scene. We won't be using scene file as our face poser for the remainder of this segment. Just select it and press the delete key. We can also delete that target while we're at it. We won't need that either. Now we need to create a path for him. We do this using an entity called a path corner. So go to the entity tool and pull up path corner. Let's see, P comes after N. I know my ABCs. There it is. Okay, go ahead and place one of these in front of our guy here, then press select and double click on it. It's important to give this first one a name. I'm going to call it walk path. Then hit apply, then close. Now what we want to do is go to the top down view here, hold down the shift key, then drag it to where you want it, then repeat. And what's going to happen is that hammer will automatically start numbering your paths for you so they follow sequentially. So look at the name walk path. The next one is walk path 1, then walk path 2, and it will keep going like this. This way your NPC will know in what order to follow the path. So let's create some more of these, and for kicks, let's have him walk in a loop before he reaches his destination. So just select the last path corner here, hold down shift, and keep dragging it and releasing it to create new points. Oh, and the same rule about an entity being too far away applies here. These path corners won't work if you place them too far apart, but you can link them together so that the entire path is as long as you want it. There's no limit to how long your final path is. Okay, once you have a path laid out, we need a way to tell the character to follow it. There are a couple ways of doing this, but I like to use the one that gives you the most control, which is an entity called an AI scripted schedule. So go to the entity tool, and it's here somewhere. There we go. Now just place it anywhere. Then select and double click on it. For the name, you can name it whatever you want. I tend to call this a brain because it controls the NPC's movement, and if you look at the icon, it looks like a brain too. So I'm typing walk brain for mine. And for target NPC, this will be his name, Cop. For schedule to run, they give you a few options here. Right now it's set to walk to the goal entity, but all that will do is make him walk to the first point, then stop. So we want walk goal path, which will make him follow the whole thing. You can also make him run, but we'll just make him walk for this. For interruptibility, I usually select death. That means he won't be distracted easily and will walk this path as long as he's able. And finally, for goal entity, we want this to be the first point in the path, which in this case is walk path. Now apply, close. Now double click on the trigger here so we can activate this. Oh, and notice the arrow with a slash through it. That means you have an output function that isn't working. This is no surprise because we deleted our scene file. So let's go fix our output here. Now it needs to point to the AI scripted schedule. So on trigger, we want the entity named WalkBrain to start schedule. Then hit apply, and that should take care of it. Now we could go ahead and run our map now, and it would work, but since you want to learn this stuff, let's go the extra mile here. Our cop here can run or walk, but he does not fly. So let's send an NPC that does fly. There aren't any that appear in the video, but let's go and add a seagull to this map. It's not that big a stretch. If you've lived near a coast, you've probably seen seagulls in parking lots before. I hear they get confused and think it's the sea. I guess that means they're not too bright, so don't feel too bad if you accidentally run over one with your car. Okay, let's add a seagull by going to the Entity tool, then NPC Seagull. We'll place him here. Then let's double click on him. First, let's turn him about the right direction. Next, he needs a name. There's nothing wrong with Seagull. So hit apply, and that's all we have to do here. Now let's create a path for him the same way, using path corners. Just place it there in front of him. Then once you've placed the first one, use select and double click on it so you can name it. I'm going to call this Flight Path. Then apply and close. Now same deal as before, just hold down Shift and drag it. And now I'm going to switch to a different view so I can raise it up off the ground. Now I'll just keep making more path corners and adjusting them until I have a good flight path. Now while I'm doing this, you should know that you can make your seagull walk and hop along the ground using the same method we used for the cop. But in order for it to fly, we have to do things slightly differently, which is the reason for me showing you this in the first place. As you can probably tell, flight paths are more of an annoyance since you have to adjust them in all 3 dimensions as opposed to just 2 on the ground. It makes me wonder if I'll live to see interface controls like in the movies Minority Report or Johnny Mnemonic. Those looked awesome. Both of those movies are kinda so-so, but they have some neat science fiction gadgets in them. Okay, getting closer. Okay, now that that's done, we need to go back to the trigger to start this. We don't even need an AI scripted schedule for the seagull here. So double click on the trigger and go to Outputs again. And we're going to click on Add. On trigger, target entity named Seagull will fly away. And for the parameter, we need to enter in the name of the first point on that path, which is Flight Path. Apply, close. And now when we run this, our cop will walk in a loop and our seagull will take off flying. So let's do that. Go to File, Save As. I'm calling this Motion 2. Save. Then File, Run Map. Okay. Did you know that if you were exposed to a vacuum, like in outer space, you could survive for about 1.5 minutes? You'd probably lose consciousness after about 10 seconds or so, but it wouldn't be instant death like you might think. There's actually an instance back in the 60s where a NASA technician got caught in an accidental decompression and was exposed to a vacuum for about 30 seconds before they were able to get him out. It knocked him unconscious to be sure, but when he came to, he was more or less okay afterwards. Before he blacked out, he did recall the saliva on his tongue boiling away. Okay, let's run this. Whoa, our seagull's looking a little drunk there. He made it though. Now our cop's walking in a loop. And actually, his motion looks a little bit wooden for that. That's because we probably could have used more path corners. The more you have in a curve, the smoother the end result will look. But for now, it gets the job done. So let's head back to Hammer for method 3. Alright, back in Hammer. Let's zoom in for a second. Yeah, you see how pronounced those angles are? If we had more, his walk would have been smoother. But that's something you can do on your own. Moving ahead, let's start deleting stuff we don't need again. First, we can get rid of the AI scripted schedule, so select that and press delete. Also, we can get rid of the seagull, so delete him too. Now we should probably delete all these path corners, but it's going to be kind of bothersome to delete them one by one, so I'm going to show you a faster way. Go up to Map here, then Entity Report. This lists every entity you're using in your map. So we're going to scroll down the path corner, select the first one, then hold Shift, and select the bottom one. Notice how this has highlighted all of them in the map now. Then just press Delete and they're all gone. And you can close this window now. This is just something handy to know when you deal with a bunch of the same entity. Okay, so now we're going to learn about moving characters using scripted sequences. Scripted sequences can also be used to animate your characters in a more forceful way. However, they're not nearly as flexible as scene files, so I don't usually use them unless I have to. We'll touch a little bit on how to animate with them here as well. So the first step is to go to the Entity tool and select a scripted sequence. Then place it where you want your character to end up. I'm putting it behind the curb here, and while we're on the topic, let me show you something else. I actually cheated a bit for Galaxy Gulp and made part of the curb completely non-solid. If you select the brush and turn it into the Entity Function brush, you can tell it to be non-solid so anything can pass right through it. While characters can walk over curbs like this, they tend to jolt straight up as they do it, which looks a little bizarre, so I chose to just not make it an issue. Remember, in Machinima, the game doesn't have to play well, it just has to look good on screen. Actually, I'll double click on it here so you can see it. Notice the solidity tag and how it's set to never solid. This is really something better left to a mapping tutorial, but I thought I'd point it out so you don't wonder what's happening when he walks right through the curb later. So close that, then we'll start learning how to use the scripted sequence here. You can see the distance is a little far on this, and the same distance limit applies. However, I'll cover how to get around that in a minute. For now, just double click on it. And we need to give it a name, so I'm calling it Script. And for target NPC, we're just going to type in Cop. Now it gets confusing. You'll notice it has a pre-action idle animation, entry animation, action animation, post-action idle animation, custom move animation, etc. Scripted sequences are like a big sandwich of animations you can play. However, I've had difficulty getting all of them to work reliably. Really, if you need a bunch of animations to play one after the other like this, you're probably better off using scene files anyway. But I'll show you how to play a simple one in a minute. For now, let's go down to Move to Position. This tells us how and if the NPC should move to where the scripted sequence is located. He can walk, run, use a custom movement, teleport there instantly, or not move there at all. We're just going to tell him to walk, though custom movement in particular can be useful. If you were to select this, you could go to the custom move animation here and specify which animation you want him to play when he moves towards the scripted sequence. So if you have an animation of him doing cartwheels, you could use that here. Unfortunately, you have to know the exact name of what to type here. It doesn't give you a list of options. Another reason I'm not crazy about scripted sequences. So anyway, let's change this back to walk, then apply, and close this for the moment. And just to be educational, I'm going to show you how to play an animation after he's done walking. But first I need to look up the name of the animation. So double click on the Metrocop, then go to the Model tab. Here you can preview all the animations available for the model, though it's not very intuitive. I'm going to try and find an animation of him ducking. If I can find it. Oh, there we are. Crouch Idle Pistol. Now once you have that, just select it, then right-click on Copy. Then close this window and head back to the scripted sequence. Now under Post-Action Idle Animation, right-click and press Paste. This will cause him to play the animation once he's done moving. And then go to the Flags tab for a second. Under here we can check Loop and Post Idle, meaning he'll just keep playing that animation forever. And you can actually check a few more here that won't hurt, like Override AI, Priority Script, and No Interruptions. These will pretty much ensure that he'll do his thing and not get distracted. And we're not going to use this, but it's worth noting that there's a Start on Spawn option here. So if you wanted a scripted sequence to run as soon as the map started, there's the option here. As with many things in Hammer, there's another way to accomplish this that I'll talk about later on. Alright, so let's hit Apply and Close. Now let's check our distance. About 650 units away. That means this scripted sequence probably won't work by default. So let's talk about how to extend the range. The way we do this is by using an entity called info nodes. These are clues that the AI uses to navigate. So go to the Entity tool, then look for Info Node. Now just place a few of these leading to the scripted sequence, like breadcrumbs Hansel and Gretel style. Now it's worth noting that these are just guidelines for the AI, so if you put these all over the place, your character won't behave predictably each time. Even the way it is now might not behave exactly the same way. Okay, our last step is to activate this sequence. So go and double click on the trigger again, and go to Output. And we can just delete one of the old and modify the other. This time we want on trigger, the entity script, and we want it to begin sequence. Now hit Apply, and Close. Now go to File, Save As, Motion 3. And File, Run Map. Actually, whenever you run your map, it automatically saves it, but I want to keep these separate so you can look at them later. Most of you probably know that women live longer than men on average. The one thing I've always wondered is how much of that is genetic and how much is simply men getting killed sooner. Statistically, men are way more likely to do stuff that gets them killed. Insurance companies know this. Men have to pay a lot more on car insurance since they're more likely to do things that'll get them in a wreck. Women are less likely to find out if their car can go 150 miles an hour or not. Anyway, I haven't seen any statistics on who lives longer due to natural causes. Just something to think about. Okay, starting our sequence. He's walking. And he's going straight through the curve like he's a ghost. And now he's ducking and staying that way. Exactly what he's supposed to do. Alright, let's go back to Hammer for the exciting conclusion of Method 4. Now this method is a little more exotic than the others. What we're going to do is make a model, then attach it to an invisible train. We're going to use the Metrocop model and have him walk, but this method can work on any object you see in the game. This method gets used all over the place in Galaxy Gulp. All the spaceships flying around, the car pulling up to the gas station, the dragon at the end, even the mob scene where the dwarf gets chased all use this method. It does involve a lot of trial and error, but you can accomplish things that might not be possible otherwise. So the first thing we should do is delete the stuff we don't need. So select these info nodes and scripted sequence and delete them. Next you can delete the AI relationship and even the Metrocop himself. After that, let's go and create a path for our train. This is going to be very similar to path corners, except this time they're called path tracks. So go to the Entity tool and select Path Track. Place it in about the same place. And this part is mostly a repeat of before. Double click on it to give it a name. I'm going to call it Train Track. Then hit Apply. So close this window. Now go to the top-down view again. And just like before, hold down Shift and drag the path track to make your path. And actually, I'm going to select all of these and move them up off the ground slightly. When I was testing this method earlier, he was literally dragging his feet, so I want to try to avoid that. And if you go and double click on this entity, I want to show you that you have some more options with this than you would with a path corner. Like notice New Train Speed here. You can actually tell the speed to change after it passes over each section of the entity. For now, we'll keep it a constant speed. You can also change the orientation, meaning the direction it's facing. It can follow the path, or it can look in one direction, etc. Anyway, that's something worth knowing. You've probably noticed by now I've skipped over a bunch of options when working with entities. That's because I don't have enough time to cover every aspect of each one, so I'm trying to focus on what I consider the most important. I encourage you to research any options you see on these entities. These are just to get you started. Okay, so close that window again, and we're going to create our train. Now our train is just going to be an invisible block. So to create one, we need to go to the brush tool here, and now go to the top-down view again like we're creating a trigger. It doesn't have to be large, a small one's fine. Once you have an outline, go and press Enter. And oops, I skipped ahead by accident. I tested this before I recorded and the program still remembered some of my settings. This is actually the texture we want, but let's pretend it's not. So make sure your brush is selected, and click on the Texture tool, and click on Browse. And notice how I started to type invisible in the filter here? We'll do that, and we're going to want to select this magenta texture that comes up. So double click on it, then close the window, and it should be the right texture now. As you can probably guess, this texture will show up as invisible inside the game. We don't want to actually see our train, it's just there to help move our object. Oh, and it doesn't matter where you put your train in the map. If you set it up correctly, it will always start at the first point on your path track. So I can cut and paste it way over here and it won't make any difference. Oops. Ignore that. What we want to do now is turn this brush into a train. To do that, it's the same method we used on the trigger earlier. Right-click on it in the wireframe window here, then click on Tie to Entity. And we want to change this to a function track train. And we want to set a couple values here. We need to give this a name. I'm going to call it train. The next important one is our first stop target. This is where the train will start when the map loads. We want this to be the name of our first point on the track, which I call train track. Even though that train is right there, it's going to start over here. Alright, most of these values are self-explanatory. Max speed is an important one since that determines how fast your train can go. The default value of 100 is good for a walking pace, so we'll leave it at that. So hit apply and close. Now our next step is to add the metrocop to this, except this time we're going to use a dynamic prop. So click on the entity tool and select prop dynamic like we did earlier. And here your position does matter since it's going to be relative to wherever your train is. We'll put it next to it for the time being. Now let's define this. Press select and double click on it. And notice the first value here, parent. If we give this prop a parent, that means it'll move wherever our parent does. So as you may have guessed, we want to make this train the parent. So go ahead and type in train here. Now click on world model, then browse. And oops, here's some more leftover work of mine. Go ahead and type in police for the filter name, and when it comes up, select the police model. And under info it says dynamic, so we're okay. So click OK, now apply. Now we can see that it has the metrocop there, but we need to give him an animation to run, otherwise he'll just stand there with his arms out and hover. But in order to do that, we need to get the name of the animation we need. So go and click on the model tab here. Man, I'm just spoiling everything. Well again, Hammer remembered what I already did. Walk all is the animation we want. So highlight it, right click on it, then click on copy. Go back to class info, and we want to go to, where is it? There it is, default animation. Go and right click and paste that value here. Now press apply. I'm going to go back to model for a second to show you what this would look like normally. If you didn't enter that value, he would just look the way he does now and not animate at all. So what we did was make him look like he's walking when he moves. Alright, so go and close this and oops, the world is falling apart on me. Okay, that's better. Actually, I forgot a value we need to change on the train, so double click on that again. Go to flags and check passable. This will make the train non-solid so it won't get hung up on anything. More importantly, it'll make sure the model won't collide with it. And another option that won't hurt is unblockable by player, meaning just like a real train, it will not stop just because you stand in front of it. Now click apply and close. Now let's reposition our cop so he's centered right with the train. It looks like he's a little bit above the ground there. I could move him closer, but I don't know exactly how this is going to look if I do that. Again, I ran into issues with his feet tracking when I tested this earlier, which screwed up the animation, so I want to avoid that. He may hover above the ground a little bit like this, but again, there's a lot of trial and error in using trains. I'll go ahead and leave him like this. Oh, and something I should mention. Notice how our cop is facing off into the distance here and not the direction we want him to go. Believe it or not, this is actually set up correctly. Let's zoom out for a second. For some strange reason, when you set up your train, everything needs to be oriented towards the east here. So if you have an object attached to a train and it's facing east, that means it's going to face forward with your train whenever you run it. So if I were to turn this guy to face the store, he would be facing where we're standing when we started the map. I don't know why this is, but it's just the way of things. Alright, the only thing left for us to do is tell this train to start when we walk over the trigger. So double click on that again. Then go to Outputs, and we can just modify the last value. For target entity, we want train, and the command we want is start forward. hit apply, close. Then when we walk over the trigger, our train will start moving and our cop will be animated to start walking. So let's run this. Go to File, Save As. I'm calling this Motion 4. Save. Now File, Run Map, OK. You probably know this, but every single form of life on Earth needs water to survive. That's why it's kind of a pet peeve of mine when I see science fiction movies and they have aliens that are vulnerable to water. Yeah, right. If we come across a life form that doesn't need water to survive, it's going to look really weird, like a crystal or arcs of electricity or something. Here we go. Well, looks like I guessed wrong. He's walking on air there. I guess he's wearing Nikes. It's just trial and error. Let's watch him walk anyway. Well, it's not completely natural looking, but it can look better with fine-tuning, and it's an option for trickier situations. So this concludes character motion. Let's learn more mysteries of animation next. Okay, this next segment is going to be on lip sync. That means we're actually going to use Face Poser for something related to the face. This could be your reason for using the source engine right here. Despite its age, Half-Life 2's lip sync capabilities are still one of the best out there. So go and launch Face Poser and we'll talk about talking. Once it's up, go to Choreography, New. I'm calling this Speech Sample. Save. For the name, I'll call him Some Dude. You may be noticing a pattern to my naming schemes by now. As usual, right-click on the name, then click on New Channel. I'm naming this audio, and that's actually all we'll need since the lip sync animations are stored in the wave itself. And probably the best example of lip sync in Galaxy Gulp is that guy who runs out of the store again. I say this because he's a standard Half-Life 2 character who's already been set up correctly. A lot of custom characters in Galaxy Gulp, like the dwarf or the skeleton, have bizarre glitches with the lip syncing. Their faces need to be rearranged. You know, like how the Mafia does to people. So if you're going to learn this, you should have a good example to work off of. So right-click in the blank space down here, and click on Load Model. And to load his model, it's under Humans, Group 1, and Male 7. Open. And suppose your guy doesn't show up centered on his face like this. Here, I'll monkey around and mess it up. If he ends up looking like this, you can always go to Options, Center on Face, and ta-da, he's good again. Looks like it wouldn't kill this guy to shave or else he's between starting a new beard. Though it's not like I have any room to talk. That looks like me after about 6 hours of not shaving. My hair grows fast. Speaking of which, did you know that former President Richard Nixon had to shave twice a day just so he'd look presentable in public? It's a curse, people. Next, we want to right-click in the blank space in the channel there and select Wave File. And to find his line, I'm going to type Call in the filter section. There it is. Since this character doesn't have a name, I gave it the prefix F after the name of the voice actor. Now I actually went and created a second version of this line for the tutorial. If you want to see the animation as it appears in the movie, click on this first one here. I'm going to select this one with a 0 at the end because it's blank and has no animation data. This way I can show you the process from scratch. Since you have to save the data to the wave in order to view it properly, it will overwrite this, but I'll go ahead and make it blank again for when you use the tutorial. Now after you've selected that, go and type in a name, which I'm calling Somebody Call the Police. It would not surprise me if that's the name to a song. Click OK. Now go and select it, then click on the Phoneme Editor tab at the bottom. And like the other windows here, you can hold down Alt and use the mouse wheel to adjust the timescale. And if you press play, you can hear the clip being played.
Somebody call the police! A fight's broken out!
Next, you want to right-click at the top in the blank space here. Now don't get confused and right-click in the center. As you can see, that brings up a different window. Right-click towards the top and select Edit Sentence Text. Now type out the words as you hear them. Ignore punctuation, and some words you may want to type phonetically, although the speech engine recognizes most common ones. And press OK. Now you can see that the engine has generated several phonemes based off our audio. And it didn't do a perfect job, as you can read below here. Yellow text like this means it was only able to partially extract the correct phonemes. Green text means it was able to extract them all, and red text means it wasn't able to extract any of them. Now if you follow these steps and get red text on this line, that means you have a problem somewhere, because we know this one works. If this happened, odds are you forgot to install the Microsoft Speech SDK. But if you're sure you have and you've rebooted your system, you may have to delete and reinstall the Source SDK itself. One of our editors ran into this problem, and this was the only solution we were able to find. Now if you get red text on another line you record, that probably isn't anything to worry about. It just means you'll have to do all the lip syncing manually. Even lines that you get a good green rating on should be double checked. You often have to make adjustments to the timings manually, which is what we're going to do next. So go and right click on the center area now and click on Commit Extraction. Now FacePoser doesn't seem 100% consistent, so if you don't have the option of Commit Extraction, then Redo Extraction should work as well. Now if you press play, you'll be able to see him start saying the words.
Somebody call the police, a fight's broken out!
But this has a couple flaws, so let's start going through this sentence so we can fix them. The first one I see is that when you scan over the word somebody, he seems to be skipping the first syllable entirely.
Somebody call the police!
See, look at that. So what we need to do is stretch this ah phoneme here so he has more time to say it. So we're going to need to click on the phoneme we want to adjust it, not this one. Just click on the bottom space here to deselect. To stretch this phoneme, hold down the control button and move these lines separating them left or right. I'm going to shorten this M here. Now this S needs to be moved over some too. All I'm doing is listening to when the syllables change in the sentence and then try to match the phonemes up to that. This M needs to be even shorter. Okay, let's play it.
Somebody call the police, a fight's broken out!
Alright, now it's playing, but the syllable isn't very pronounced. So let's change it to one that is. To do this, select the phoneme, then right-click on it and press Edit. And this will bring up a list of all available phonemes to you. Notice the phonetic spelling at the bottom, like as in earn. N, T, U. I'm going to select this ah one here because it tends to be more pronounced than the one that the engine automatically selected. Now let's scan this again. Looks pretty good. Let's play it.
Somebody call the police, a fight's broken out!
Okay, that section has been fixed, but now he's skipping the word fight entirely. So we're going to have to create the phonemes ourselves. Go and select the word here, then right-click on it and select Add Phoneme. And oops. Oh boy! Windows decided we're not worthy of this window. Well, here's a trick for that. Press Alt-Space, click on Move, then use the arrow keys on your keyboard to show this window who's boss. It tried to make a break for it. Now we're going to select F since that's the first phoneme in the word. Press OK. And unfortunately this is way too long, so he'll look like he's just saying f, which would only be fun if we added a censor beep after it. So just shorten that to something more reasonable. But now you can see that B stepped in to take its place. We're going to need a gap in this so we have room to work, so select B and temporarily delete it. We'll add it back in a minute. Now we have room to operate. So select F, right-click, and select Insert Phoneme after it. And we want an I sound next. While it's not an exact match, I find this I phoneme works well for that. So select that and just repeat the procedure. This time we want T. And then we want S. And now we need to deselect and select the R here. Right-click on that, then click on Insert Phoneme before this one. And we'll go and put our B back here. Now we need to adjust everything we've added, so just scan through it and change the lines as you need to. That looks pretty close. Now let's play it.
Somebody call the police! A fight's broken out!
Okay, this looks good except for the end. He stops the sentence too soon. Let's see where the T should be starting. Yeah, way over here. Let's stretch it. Looks good. And just for kicks, I'm going to show you one more phoneme you might need occasionally. Select and right-click the T here, then tell it to insert a phoneme after that. Then you see this at the end here? That's just silence. So if you need to tell them to shut up, here you go. Now we'll play this.
Somebody call the police! A fight's broken out!
This looks good to me, but before we stop, I'll show you another feature here. If you click on the emphasis tab, this acts like a ramp for your lip sync work here. The difference is you can add emphasis as well as take it away. You do this the same way as the ramp window. Hold down Control and click where you want your points. I'm going to exaggerate this just to show you the difference. Now let's play.
Somebody call the police! A fight's broken out!
Okay, notice how his words were more pronounced, then became less distinct? That's what this does. Really, the difference on this tends to be subtle. So unless your character needs to shout or mumble, or you'll have a major close-up, you can usually ignore this part. Valve does. Half-Life 2 doesn't use any emphasis on its lines. Alright, I'm going to select these plot points, then delete them, because they were just an example. Now if you save your file, it will write the changes to the wave itself. But pretend for a minute that you needed to change the wave after you did this and adjusted the volume. If you did that, it would delete all your work once you saved any changes to the file. So to get around that, you have to save your work externally. To do this, right-click on this blank space here, then click on Export Word Data to Text. And I'll call this Sound Data. Save. And if you need to bring it back, just right-click and press Import Word Data from Text. And I'm going to click Cancel since we already have our data. And that pretty much sums it up. Now you can make your characters talk. They'll automatically use the lip sync data whenever the wave gets played back in a scene. Now click on Choreography, Save. And I'm actually not going to run this in Hammer because you already know how to run scene files by now, and all it will look like is what you just saw in the preview there. Now I'm going to close this while I figure out what to cover next. Okay, once again through the magic of video editing, I've had time to think about what to cover next. Otherwise, this tutorial would be like one giant freestyle rap marathon, which it is not. I don't even have a backbeat. So don't be a closer, instead open face poser, and you'll become an ace on how to animate the face. Alright, reopen that last speech scene we covered if it's not up here already. We're going to add a facial expression to go with this line here. The first thing we're going to do is create another channel just to stay organized. Once again, right-click here and create a new channel. I'm calling this animation again. On more complex scenes, I usually separate it further between head and body movements, but this is fine for now. Now to create a facial animation, right-click on the blank space in the channel, then click on Flex Animation. The name can be anything. I'm sticking with something exciting like facial expression, even though I'm tempted to make up a code name. Press Enter, then stretch it out so it covers the duration of the line. There's no limit to the length of these. Make them as long as you want them. Once that's set up, make sure it's selected, then click on the Flex Animations tab. Right-click and press Show if it doesn't show up. Now take a look at all these options. As you can see, there are dozens of variables related to animating the face. Some of these are pretty self-explanatory, like chin raiser here. Others you have to experiment with to figure out what they're referring to. All these options are related to simulating different muscles in the face. I'm not going to go over what every single one does here because that would take a long time and it's something you can easily figure out on your own. Also, these change depending on what model you're using. I do encourage you to go through these one by one so you can figure out what each track does. Some of them are practically useless, others can make all the difference with your character's expression. So let's experiment a little bit. I'm going to try out Wrinkler. Double click on it. Actually, you may have to triple or quadruple click on it. It's not the most responsive. And to add a plot point, it's just like the ramp window. You hold down Control and click on the blank space somewhere. Now that it's created a point, let's scan over it to figure out what it's changing. As you can see, that raised the muscles around his nose, which changes his expression like he's displeased with something. Let's add another one to go with it. Click a few times on Lowerer. This is used to lower his eyebrows. Now add another point to go with the other one. And now when we scan over it, he looks like he's ready to bust some heads. So you can see how easy it is to change expressions with just a few adjustments to these tracks. However, this expression isn't really appropriate for this line, so I'm going to delete them. I'm going to zoom out a bit. Now you just drag and select the points, then press the delete key. And to the best of my knowledge, you can only delete the points one track at a time. We're not going to be using these particular tracks now, so if you want a quick way to collapse them, you can right-click here and go to Collapse. Then in this case, All Tracks. You can expand tracks the same way. I still haven't figured out which is faster, doing the quadruple clicking thing, or right-clicking and clicking on Expand. For now, I'm just going to keep rapid-fire clicking on them until they open. And you may notice these old tracks are still highlighted in green, but as long as they don't have any plot points on them, it doesn't matter. They won't affect anything. Now let's open up some new tracks to create an animation for this line. When he says this, the character is kind of alarmed, so I'm going to try and recreate that. The first thing I'm going to do is open his eyes more so he doesn't look like he's falling asleep. So open up the lid raiser track here, which stands for eyelid raiser, and make a plot point towards the top. Then let's zoom out a bit and make another one towards the end so he holds it. This actually isn't meant to be very gradual. The idea here would be to start showing this look on his face before you start filming, so you don't even have to worry about fading it in. Now when we scan over it, you can see his eyes shoot wide open. Now he looks like he means business. Next I'm going to raise his eyebrows, which is going to take 2 steps. The first will be the inner raiser. So open that and create a plot point on both ends. Now he looks pretty worried, but I'm going to raise the rest of them so he looks more alarmed. So just repeat the same thing on the outer raiser here. And he's definitely starting to look a little freaked out now. Let's play it and see how it looks with the sentence.
Somebody call the police! A fight's broken out!
Well, it definitely fits the mood better, though it still looks a little bit wooden. However, we don't have to worry about that because that's what idling animations will help take care of. If you really want to go the extra mile though, you could use more plot points to vary the intensity more, or even more tracks for expressions. For some lines, you might even want to change his facial expressions as he delivers certain words. If so, there's a helper tool for that, the timing tags like we used with gestures. To create one here, just right-click, then go to Timing Tags, then Insert. Again, you can name it anything. And now as you can see, it lines up with all the different tracks, so it's easier to coordinate changes in expressions. And if you need to adjust the timing slightly, you can also stretch the timings in between different tags, just like gestures. I'm going to get rid of this one since I'm not using it. And really, that is all you need to know in order to animate faces. I went through this section relatively quickly compared to the others, but that's only because the fundamentals behind it are pretty simple. You just plot points for each track as you need to, and change the intensity accordingly. Now what I've created here is an extremely basic example. This can get very complex and time-consuming the more you animate your face. So if you want lots of subtle changes where you're working with a dozen or so tracks, this part can take a long time to do. But now that you've learned how to do it, the rest of this is up to you. I have heard from another animator that I've worked with that it's easier if you look in a mirror when you're trying to recreate the expression you want. Then you can notice more subtle differences you might not think of normally. This sounds like good advice to me. I've done the same thing with doing head bobbing animations, which I'll cover in the next segment. Now, as much as I'd like to end this section right here and now, I probably should cover how expressions work. These are another way of creating facial expressions. They're less complicated, but are also less versatile than flex animations. Now let me tell you a story about expressions. Once upon a time, before episode 1 came out, I was learning the Source SDK the same as you are right now. I was trying really hard to learn how to use expressions because due to a bug in the software at the time, lip syncing wasn't working and expressions were a backdoor way of doing things. Now I got expressions to work in FacePoser, but in the game, they never worked. Not once. Even in the online documentation at the time, they said they were broken and I should just use flex animations instead. So I did. But time passed and thanks to new updates from Valve, expressions still don't work. In Half-Life 2 anyway. I did get them to work using episode 1, but I tried everything I could think of, and they just will not work in Half-Life 2 regular. Now watch Valve release a patch that fixes everything after this tutorial is published, just to spite me. But, assuming you can get them to work, they do have some use, so we're going to cover that now. Go to the Expressions tab at the bottom, right-click to bring up Show if you need to. Now by default, the only expressions you're going to have stored are the phonemes used in lip syncing. So if you want to browse through all of those, you can simply drag the phonemes to the timeline to sound out your words. However, this method is slightly clunkier and more time-consuming, so we're not going to cover it. Instead, we're going to create our own expression from work we've already done. So go up to the blank space next to the tabs there, then right-click and click on New. Now type in a name for this. I'm calling it Test Expression. Now that's created a new category. Let's add an expression to work with. Go and select the flex animation and scan it to a point where he's scared. This is one way of getting the data we need for the flexes. Now, right-click in the blank area over here and click on New Expression. Give it a name and a description. I'm calling this Alarmed. Press Enter. Now just drag it to the timeline. And boom, an instant facial expression. You won't have any variation between the different face muscles the way you can with flex animations. The only thing you can do is ramp it. You can stretch it as long as you want to. So this is good for maintaining a simple facial expression without a lot of change. Now before we stop, go and click on the Flex Sliders tab. This is an alternate method of setting up the expression you want. You can adjust all the different values for the face here if you don't want to use a flex animation to set up your data. In fact, if you click on your flex animation, you can see it change the values on the fly like so. Then when you have it set up the way you want it, you can create a new expression the same way as before. Alright, I'm going to save this scene file so you can look at it. I'm going to Choreography, Save As, and I'll call this Facial Expression. Save. And actually, I forgot a step. I'm not sure what the best order to do this in is, but if you want to increase your odds of this working, go to your Expression tab, right-click on it, click on Export to VFE. Then right-click again, then Save. Now again, there's no guarantees this stuff will work in-game, especially with Half-Life 2 Regular. I got it to work in Episode 1 doing all these steps. If you don't, then I'm sorry. I've had a long and sordid affair with expressions and I want it to end. So let's close this and move on to the next section. Okay, this next segment is an extension of flex animations. Here I'm going to cover how to do head bobbing on characters. By head bobbing, I mean moving the character's head up and down in accordance with their speech. It's particularly useful for characters who don't have a face. With this technique, you can still indicate which character is talking without the need for lips. It's a form of puppeteering, similar to what somebody animating sock puppets might use. So let's open up Face Poser so you can become a puppet master. Now the natural candidate for this technique would be the Combine soldiers you see in the beginning, since they're masked in helmets. However, their models don't include the needed flexes by default. In the video, their animations were done in XSI by another animator, which is beyond the scope of this tutorial. However, we do have one character who uses this technique, the alien convenience store clerk. So let's start setting up the scene for him. Go to Choreography, New. I'm calling this head bobbing. And for our actor name, I'll call him Clerk. Press Enter, and as always, right-click on the name and on New Channel. I'm calling this first one Audio. Then do the same thing again, and I'm going to call this channel Animation. Again, this step isn't necessary, it's just a good way to stay organized. Now let's load up the alien model. Right-click in the blank space at the bottom. Click on Load Model. And the model we're going to want is Vortigaunt. So select that and press Open. You know, Valve calls these guys Vortigaunts, but I'm not sure they're even given a name in Half-Life 1. Okay, let's zoom back a little bit on the model so we can get a better view of him. This character actually does have a face, but come on, it's not much of one. You can't tell if he's frightened, angry, sad, or what. Head bobbing will be like icing on the cake for making him look a little more alive. Alright, now the next thing we want to do is load his line. So right-click in the audio channel, then go to Wave File. And under Filter, type V-. I use this prefix for his line, and there it is. Type in the name for it. Then select the line and press OK. And this line has already been lip-synced, which actually works on the Vortigaunt model too. If you press play, you can see it here.
Hey, somebody's gonna have to pay for this.
So he already has some animation to him, but again, this will make him even more expressive. Plus, it's a tough call whether those really count as lips or not. Okay, once you have your audio file up, then the next step is to create a flex animation. You do this the same as a facial expression by right-clicking in the Animations channel, then click on Flex Animation. For the name, type head bob and press enter. Alright, now go and stretch your flex animation so it covers the entire length of the audio file. Letting it go a little bit over on each end is fine. Now click on the Flex Animation tab, and the main flex channel we're going to be concerned with is the head up and down one. So triple click or whatever on that, and I'll resize my window since I'm recording at a lower resolution here. Now the way head bobbing works is to coordinate the up-down movements of the head with the syllables of your sentence. You can also use the head left or right channel or the tilt one, but those are more dependent on what's being said. So if your character was saying, "No, you're all crazy," then you probably want him shaking his head left and right. For normal conversations, I find the up-down channels work best for expressing characters with no faces. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't use the others, just that the more channels you're animating, the more work you're creating for yourself. Alright, back to working with the syllables. You can only hear the individual syllables when you scan over them in the choreography window. If you scan in the flex animation window, it will be silent. So our first step is to scan over the sentence until we hear the first syllable. Here you can hear the A in him saying hey. So we want to go and create a plot point during the loudest part of this syllable, which is about right here. So hold down Control and create a point for his head to move up as he says that. Now when we scan over it, you can see his head start to rise as he says that. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. You need to experiment with what's a good time scale for the sentence you're working with. You don't want too much or too little detail. Otherwise the head movements will be too twitchy or else too slow. Okay, right here he's ended his first syllable and he's starting his next. So we're going to want to create another plot point closer to the center of the line for that S sound. Then his head will move back down a little bit. The next syllable starts right about here, so I'm putting another plot point for his head to move up again. Now the next syllable is heard here, but I'm going to make this one go down to counteract the upward movements of the last one. This isn't to say you want a total seesaw movement of the head, but it's a good starting point for figuring out your motions. Okay, this syllable is ended, so we're going to create another point closer to the center again. Okay, what's happening here is that he lowers his tone for the gonna, then raises it again for the has sound. A good rule of thumb is that if a character lowers his tone like this, that's a good cue to lower his head movement. So I'm going to create a plot point for the has section. Now I'm going to lower it for the gonna section. Now let's play this to do a quick check on how we're doing so far.
Hey, somebody's gonna have to pay for this. Hey.
Not bad, though his head seems to come up a little fast for the hey section. We can fix this by lowering the peak of this first point, so the slope isn't so steep. You can either hold down Control or you can simply select plot points to move them up and down. Alright, let's continue with the rest of the sentence.
Hey, somebody's gonna have to...
Again, his tone is lowering for 2, so we'll lower his head movement.
Hey, somebody's gonna have to pay for this. Somebody's gonna have to pay.
Alright, he has a good amount of punch in his delivery for pay, so that's an obvious line to raise his head for. In addition to tone, the energy level a character has in his syllable can be another indicator of whether to move it up or down. Okay, his voice drops again for saying 4, so we'll bring it back to the center. And it rises a little bit for this, so we'll raise it again. And his sentence ends right about here, so we'll create one more point. Now let's see what this whole sentence looks like when it's played back.
Hey, somebody's gonna have to pay for this.
Okay, that looks pretty good. So now when you play this back, it will be obvious he's the one saying this line. And there's no one correct way to do this. I'm just showing you a technique that I find works well. Like facial expressions, try saying the line yourself and be aware of how your own head is bobbing up and down. The motion here is also a little bit exaggerated, but this method is best used on characters who have no other means of expressing themselves when they talk, so it can balance out. You can also use this technique on normal talking people, and the methodology is the same. The only difference is that you should lower how high or low the head movements go so they're not as extreme. The reason being is that regular people don't bob their head up and down quite this much when they talk unless they're on a sugar rush. Alright, go to Choreography, Save. Alright, that takes care of this segment. Now stay tuned for the exciting and final conclusion of Face Poser. Alright, by now you should be getting a pretty decent grasp of how Face Poser works. We've covered how to animate your characters, manipulate those animations, lip sync, facial expressions, and head bobbing. This is the last section of Face Poser, and all I'm going to be covering are just the odds and ends I think are useful or worth knowing. So if this tutorial was a kung fu movie, this would be the part where the student learns some weird stance that's not really part of the basic training. I don't know. Let's just fire up Face Poser again. Okay, I'm going to build off the last lesson for this. So if you decided to skip the part on head bobbing, that's okay, but load the scene file up anyway if you want to follow along. The first thing I'm going to cover is how to loop part of your scene. I generally avoid this because unless you time the animation right, the looping can look pretty abrupt, but it does have some uses. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab an animation to loop. This walking animation will work well, it's good and active. So just drag that to the choreography window, press OK, then give it a name and press enter. Now I'm going to adjust the view so we get more of a full body shot.
Somebody have to pay for this.
Alright, so he's going to say his line and do a walking animation for a second or two. I'm going to show you how to make him walk. Forever. Okay, go and orient yourself towards the beginning here, then right click and click on New, then Loop. Now give it a name. And you can put in any value you want here, but I like to make the start time the same as the loop to time. I'll show why in a second. So copy this first value and paste it in the second text block. And you can tell it how many times to loop. Like the text says, -1 loops it forever, so let's type that in. Then press OK. Now the reason I made both values the same is because you can change the end time of the loop in the choreography window here. You just have to select the pink triangle here, then drag it forward. Now he sets a loop from where that pink bar starts to where the triangle ends. I prefer this to entering in the numbers manually because then you can see where it's stopping, instead of having to enter in 4.253 seconds or something silly like that. Now let's play this. I'm going to make a marker here so it'll start just before the loop. And there he goes, doomed to walk the earth forever. But I don't want it to loop forever since I have other stuff to show you. So I'm going to delete this by right-clicking on the pink triangle, then selecting the delete option. He is free once again. Alright, so that's how you loop any section of your scene. I only looped a walk animation, but it applies to everything and everyone you have in your scene, so keep that in mind when you use it. The next thing we're going to cover is how to launch a sub-scene. A sub-scene is what it sounds like. It's telling Face Poser to start running another scene in the middle of your current scene. There's more than one way to do this, but Face Poser has its own method built in. To activate this, it's pretty simple. Just right-click on the blank space somewhere, then go to Sub-Scene. As usual, you can name it whatever you want. And then go to Browse and pick a scene you want to run. I'll just pick the first one we created for this. Press OK. And there you go, you've created a sub-scene. Now you can't adjust the length. This is because your other scene already has an established length, which will show up here. And if you're wondering, I don't know what happens if you tell a sub-scene to run the scene you're already running. I've never tried it before. I imagine the world might end. Alright, I'm going to select this and delete since I want to cover one concept at a time here. The next thing I'm going to talk about is a tool called the Scene Ramp. You can open it by clicking on the tab at the bottom. Now this is similar to the ramping tool, except instead of affecting one animation or expression, it affects your whole scene. The controls are exactly the same. The length of it is always going to be the same as the length of your scene file, as you can see here. Let's create a plot point quick to give you an idea of how it works. Hold down Control and click. Now I'll move this so it starts off at 100%, then slopes down to 0. And notice on the animations we have present now, you can see their intensity dropping. If we play, oops, let me start from the beginning.
Hey, somebody's gonna have to pay for this.
If you play from the beginning, you can see it starts off normally and gets very weak towards the end. I've personally never had a need for the scene ramp, but if you have a really basic scene, then this might be useful for you. And we certainly don't need to keep this, so I'm going to select this point and delete it. And I'll close this window while I'm at it. I need all the space I can get. I'm recording at 1024 by 768, so you have a nice 1-to-1 ratio for the video. Not because it's fun, in case you're wondering. Okay, I've covered a few more basic features to Face Poser, so let's make our life more complicated by adding another character to the same scene. I'm going to load that guy we were using earlier. So right-click on the blank space at the bottom, select Load Model, and we want to go to the folder Humans, Group 1, Mail 7, then open. And it's going to take a second to load him up. Now let's zoom him out a little bit so we can see him. And you can switch between the two models at any time by pressing the tab on the bottom. And an interesting feature about this is that the other model will use any animation data that it can. It has to share the same flexes and animation names in order to work, but if it has them, then your animations are interchangeable. I'll play the animation for the clerk to show you what I'm talking about.
Hey, somebody's gonna have to pay for this.
See, he spoke his lines, went through the head bobbing, and the walk too. This guy is a tool. Let's adjust him a little bit more. I may have forgotten to mention this, but in addition to zooming and rotating the model, you can also move him around two-dimensionally by holding down the Shift key and dragging him. That's going to be useful to know in a minute. Alright, so we have two models, but only one actor. So let's fix this and add another actor so that the other guy doesn't have to possess the clerk. Right-click on the side here, then go to New, then Actor. I'll name him Dude 1 again. And right-click on him to create a new channel. And here be sure to double-check to which actor it's adding the channel to. We want Dude 1. And I'll make this the audio channel. Press OK. Now let's add something for him to say. I'm going to use that same line we worked with earlier. So right-click in the blank space again, go to Wave File, then under Filter, I'm typing Call to find that line. And this time I'm selecting the one without a zero since that's been lip-synced ahead of time. Then give it a name and press Enter. Alright, now I'm going to move this line over so we won't have two actors talking at the same time. Now by default, if you have two actors like this, when you play through the scene, it will try and play all the events available. So watch as I scan over this.
Somebody call the police, a fight's broken out!
Here he's saying his line for Dude 1, yet playing the walk animation for the clerk. If the scene has conflicting values, then it will always default to which actor is on the bottom. So say you wanted to isolate one character and see only what he's supposed to do. All you have to do is double-click on the actor name, and that will disable them. This won't affect anything in-game, only in the Face Poser preview. You can also disable or enable individual channels the same way.
Somebody call the police, a fight's broken out!
Now if we scan over it, you can see he doesn't play the clerk's walk animation anymore. But let's take this one step further. If you're using two different models like we are, you have another option available. You can actually view both at the same time saying their correct lines. So let's do that. I'm going to reorient him here. Now right-click on one of the models at the bottom and click on Show All. This will make all your loaded models appear. And if you select the Vortigaunt, you can rotate him and move him around by holding down Shift. Now we can select Male 7 and do the same thing. But this isn't enough in itself. If we scan over the scene, it will still play them all only for the current model you have selected.
Somebody call the police, a fight's broken out!
So if you want to actually give these guys some identity, then click on Associate Model with Actor. And the clerk here is being played by the Vortigaunt, so press OK. Now repeat this for Dude 1. Right-click, Associate Model with Dude 1, select Male 7, then press OK. Now let's play this sucker.
Hey, somebody's gonna have to pay for this.
Somebody call the police, a fight's broken out!
Excellent. Unfortunately, this doesn't look like anything we'd actually use in a real scene, but that's why this is odds and ends. I wanted to keep it as simple as possible to show you how these work. And remember, this only works if your actors are using different models. So that scene at the beginning with the Combine soldiers talking wouldn't be able to use this technique because they all share the same model. For that, I had to play one of them at a time and disable different actors to see how the scene would play out. Okay, one more topic I'm covering in Face Poser. I've saved the best for last. Scene triggers. These are simple yet awesome ways to make things happen in Hammer. A scene trigger is a cue that Hammer uses that you can tell to do anything. Remember how when we walked over those trigger blocks in Hammer, we could tell pretty much any entity to do anything? Well, you can do the same thing here, except better yet, you can time it so it occurs exactly when you want to in your scene. So say you wanted a car to start and pull off at a certain time. You could create a scene trigger here, then head over to Hammer and hash the rest of it out. So let's create one of these. Right-click in the blank space somewhere, then click on Fire Trigger. You can name it anything, and use the drop-down menu here, which will give you up to 8 different triggers to fire. We'll just select number 1, press OK. Now that red sliver you see there represents when it starts. And to really do this part justice, we're going to magically head over to Hammer really quick so I can show you how to activate this. Alright, I've opened our Basic 1 map and already added the logic choreograph scene. To use a scene trigger, double click on this, go to Outputs, then click on Add. And from my output, you see all those on trigger numbers? Well, they match up with Face Poser. So on trigger 1 would mean that when trigger 1 is fired in Face Poser, that's the cue for Hammer to do something. And as to what it does, that's up to you. Start a fire, move a train, make a character walk, you get the idea. Okay, back to Face Poser. And that pretty much sums it up. That's everything I can think of to learn for Face Poser. That doesn't mean we covered everything, but we covered everything I use in making Machinima. We still have more to go over in Hammer, but hey, you got through Face Poser. Give yourself a pat on the back, go party, rob a bank. And I'm going to go to Choreography, Save As, and I'll call this Odds and Ends. That wraps it up. So let's head over to Hammer and learn a little more about that. This next segment of Hammer is going to be a little more specialized, but I feel it's important for machinima making. The main thing we're going to be covering here are attachments and the logic auto entity. By attachments, I mean being able to attach objects to your character's body or hold them. This can be kind of tricky to do in Source depending on what your objective is, but I'm going to at least show you the fundamentals. For that logic entity, this doesn't have a specialized purpose in filmmaking so much as it's useful to know when using Hammer. Okay, so let's fire this up and we'll get started. To illustrate the use of attachments, I'm going to show you how we made those Combine soldiers hold their cups in the opening scene. Alright, go to File, Open. We're going to want to open Basic 2, then click on Open. The reason being is we've already added the Combine soldiers to that scene, so we'll save ourselves some time if we use this map instead of starting from scratch. Now if I remember correctly, these two guys here are the ones that are holding the cups. Since we're going to be distinguishing them from the others, they're going to need names. And if I click on this guy, he still has the name Bob from before. And if I click on the other one, he doesn't have a name. So let's double click on him and give him one. And again, I forgot all their names in the video, so you'll have to forgive me for making up new ones. Let's call this guy Chuck. Now hit Apply and Close. Now the thing about attachments is that in order to make a character look like he's holding something, he has to have an attachment point already specified in the model. The default Combine soldier models do not have the one we need. So we're going to load modified versions of these models that were developed by people at Noesis. This is going to be similar to how we loaded up the Turbo Chi model. Since we need to do this to both of them, go ahead and hold down Control and select both of these guys. Now go over to the wireframe view here, right click on the selection box, and click on Properties. We'll need to turn Smart Edit off, so go and click on that button. And we want to go to Model. Right now it's set to use the default model, so we need to change this. Highlight this section after the / and delete it. Then we need to type in the name of the model. And that name is going to be Combine _ Combine 3 Revision / Combine.mdl. Real easy to remember, right? Okay, hit Apply, then Close. The naming scheme was sort of an afterthought with these custom models. It's like the cleaning agent formula 409. It's called that because that's the 409th formula that the company came up with until they had a good one. At least I think that's true. Okay, so we have our characters set up. The next step is to create the cups for them to be holding. So go to the Entity tool, and we're going to need a dynamic prop. I'm going to type the name in here. Now go and place 2 of them in the map since we'll need a cup for each person. Then use the Select tool and hold down Control to select both of them. Then, like the soldiers, right-click on the selection in the wireframe view and click on Properties. Turn Smart Edit back on by clicking on it. Now for World Model, click on Browse, and oops, you can see my leftover work again. As you can guess, type in Cup in the filter window. We'll have to wait for it while it loads everything. Okay, that's the one we want. Cup Interior Texture. And a quick check in the Info tab shows that this is already set up to be a dynamic prop, so no problems there. Now click on OK. Apply. Close. And now we need to configure the settings for the cups individually, so double click on one of them here. And we need to specify the parent for this one. We'll go with Bob first. And we need to give this cup a name, so I'll call it Cup 1. Now press Apply, then Close. And we'll do the same thing for the next cup, so double click on it. It already has name selected, so we'll do that first. We'll call this Cup 2. And for parent, this would be Chuck. Now apply, then close. Okay, right now the cups are actually attached to our soldiers, but they won't look right when the map starts. The reason being is that they will only move when the soldier's body moves, and they attach based on where they are right now. So that means if the soldier turns, these cups will be flying along the ground in the parking lot. What we want to do is get more specific and attach the cup to their hands. In order to do this, we're going to need the name of an actual attachment point included with the model. To find out the names of the different attachment points, let's take a quick field trip over to the model viewer. So go to File, Save As, I'm calling this Attachments, then press Save. I'm not done here yet, but if I'm going to be closing Hammer, then I should save my work. Alright, so now I'm going to close Hammer, then open up the model viewer. This will give us more information about our model. Once that's up, go to File, Load Model. We're using that Combine 3 Revision one. Select that and open it. Oh, good. This is perfect. I just taught you how to crash the program. Well, this right here is why you're sometimes playing with fire when using custom models the way we do. Now you know why I didn't use a model like the dwarf to teach lip syncing. Things can get a little bit crazy. Okay. Well, I'll have to settle for showing you how to do this on a model that doesn't crash the program. I'm going to close this, reopen the model viewer, and this time we'll just load the regular Combine model. Go to File, Load Model, then scroll down here a bit, and there's the normal Combine soldier. Let's open him. Okay, good. Progress. Alright, the part of this that we're interested in is the Attachments tab. Click on that. Then if you look at the left, you'll notice there's a list of different attachment points here. If you click on them, it will show you where in the body these points are. Now you could attach the cup to the ones on his hand here, but when we tried that, it wasn't positioned correctly. So the modeler working on this created a new attachment point just for the cup. Unfortunately, I can't show you it because that will crash the program. But this is how you find out the names of your attachment points normally. But you'll get to cheat because I already knew the name of the attachment point we needed all along. Like some sort of villain from the Scooby-Doo show. It's simply cup. So armed with that knowledge, let's head back to Faceposer and show them how to hold their cups. Doesn't sound too exciting when I say it like that, but I'm trying. Do you know what causes the cracking sound on a bullwhip? What's happening is that the tip of it is looping so fast it actually causes a tiny sonic boom. Pretty cool, huh? Alright, go to File and let's quick load the attachments map. Now in order to tell the cups to attach themselves to the soldier's hands, we're going to need another entity called Logic Auto. This is a very useful entity as it can activate different functions of other entities. So let's go to the Entity tool, and we're going to look for Logic Auto. Select that, then place one of them in your map. Now go to Select, then double click on it. And we want to go to Outputs, then Add. And this has a very useful output. This one right here, on Map Spawn. Select that, and what this means is that as soon as the map starts, it will activate whatever function you want. Your way, right away. Alright, now the entity we want is Cup1. And we want to set parent attachment. And the parameter we want is cup, even though I wasn't able to show it to you. Now hit apply. Oh, and a quick note, whenever you have a parent attachment like this, you have to specify the parent ahead of time, but we did that with the cups earlier. Okay, now this first cup is all set to be attached to the parent's hand. No matter where your cup is located, it will snap into place as soon as we start the game. Now we still need to do the attachment for the second one, but before we do that, I want to talk about another option here. If you have Half-Life 2 Episode 1 or a later version of the source engine, you have an option called Set Parent Attachment Maintain Offset. Now what this does is that it works in the same way as a parent attachment, except it remembers the position of your object. Again, this cup will snap into place because the NPC model has already been configured that way. But say you wanted to attach an object to a model that didn't have the right attachment point. You could adjust the position ahead of time in Hammer, then tell it to attach when everything was lined up and it would work. Alright, we're not going to do that here, but it's definitely worth knowing. Okay, I'm changing this back to just regular Set Parent Attachment. Now, let's select this output, copy it, then paste it. And now all we have to do is change the entity name to Cup2, and this will be set for the other one as well. Then hit apply. As you may have noticed, I try to take shortcuts like this whenever I can in Hammer, because all these things add up time-wise. Alright, go ahead and close this window. Now we have our cups attaching to the soldiers, but they're not really going to be holding them. By default, they're just going to stand there idling with their arms at their side, meaning if these cups had real liquid in them, they would just spill out, so that's no good. What we need is a way for them to be standing there holding their cups without spilling them. Now lucky for us, the XSI animator who worked on this included an animation like that. We just have to run it. I'm going to use a scripted sequence for this, since it's relatively simple, and I already said I was done with Face Poser in the last section. If I used a scene file here, that would make me a liar, so I don't want that. So click on the Entity tool, and select the Scripted Sequence entity again. And this one you can just place anywhere. We're not going to move them, just animate them. And only put down one for now. I'll explain why in a minute. Now go to the Select tool, then double-click on the scripted sequence. First, let's give it a name. I'll call this Script 1. And the next value we care about is Target NPC. We'll go ahead and cover Bob first. Now we need the name of the animation. Unfortunately, we don't know that name yet, so we're going to have to look it up. So press Apply, then close this, and we'll come back to this in just a minute. Now before, we could look up our animation by simply double-clicking on our model and going to the Models tab. But if we do that here, it's not going to show all our animations because it's still looking at that original Combine model. So we're going to have to do something else. I'm going to temporarily create another prop just so we can preview the correct model. Go and close this window, then go to the Entity tool, and let's create another prop dynamic. Now remember, this is temporary. We're going to delete this once we're done, so don't get too attached to it. Oh god, I just realized that was a pun, considering the topic of this tutorial and all. That was an accident, folks. Sorry about that. It won't happen again. Okay, once your prop has been placed, select and double-click on it. Now go to World Model, Browse. And this time we want Combine. A lot of those, underscore Combine. There we go. So click on him, and notice over here there's a tab for sequences. Click on that. And now we can see all the different animations for this model. And if I recall correctly, the one we want is Combine Idle with Cup. Do you see it? Help me out here, people. Just shout out if I go right by it. Combine Idle with Cup. Oh, come on, it's here somewhere. There it is. Good job. Select that one, and as you can see, that looks like a good animation for holding a cup. So remember that name there. Now close this, then close this, then make sure the entity is selected and delete it. Now, let's head back to our scripted sequence by double-clicking on it. Now you'd think the action animation would be the best place for this, especially since we have the option to loop the action animation over here. You see? We can tell it yes. This would be a good thing because we want to loop this animation. Now let me tell you folks, here's what I don't like about the engine sometimes. I tried looping the animation this way before I even started recording this segment. And what happened was he would play his animation through once, then turn into a perfect statue afterwards. So he would be there holding the cup, but after playing through the animation, he just froze like a rock. You can get away with that from a distance, but up close it doesn't look as good as having an idling animation. So what I found did work was using the post-action idle animation here. So let's type in the name of the animation. Combine _ idle _ with cup. That won't loop it by itself, but we'll fix that in a second. The next thing we want to do is make sure he stands still. If you click on Move Position here, you can see it's set to walk, which is bad. That means he'll turn around and walk to wherever your scripted sequence is located. So we just want to change this to No, then he'll behave. Now we need to go to Flags and I'll show you something else. Now as great and flexible as the engine is, here's what really drives me nuts about working with Source. Sometimes you have options that flat out do not work, and you usually have to find this out the hard way. Without this tutorial, and maybe even with it, learning Source can be the school of hard knocks. Look at this. This option says Start on Spawn. Now in my blurry memory of the past, I remember this function working when you checked it. So in a perfect world, if you checked this option, then your sequence would begin as soon as the map started. But again, I tried using this before I started recording, and no, it does not work. For this anyway. He won't lift a finger to play his animation if you use this. So does it work? Maybe sometimes? I don't know. It sure didn't work for this example, I'll tell you that. So we're not going to use this. It makes me mad. We'll activate this a different way. For now, go ahead and click on the option Loop in Post Idle. This feature does work, which is why I like it. This will make our guy play his animation, then keep looping it afterwards. Okay, I think that's it. So go and click on Apply, Close. Now we need to create a new scripted sequence for our other guy. Now we just configured a lot of settings for our first scripted sequence. Instead of doing all that over, let's just select it, then press Ctrl-C to copy this, then Ctrl-V to paste. Now let's double click on this new one, and we'll only have to change a few settings. Now obviously we're going to have to change the name. Do you see how this is in bold text now? That means there's at least one other entity that shares the same name, which can cause problems. So let's just call this Script 2. Hit Apply, and the next setting we need to change is the target NPC. This one will be for Chuck. Hit Apply, and notice it's remembered all the other settings, so that's all we have to do. So just click Close. And now the last step is to tell the scripted sequences to start, since these things are defective and won't do it on their own. To do this, go and double click on the Logic Auto entity again, go to Outputs, then click on Add. And we're going to want OnMap Spawn again, this time Script 1, and we want it to begin sequence. Now copy that, paste it, and just change the name here to Script 2. Now press Apply, and close that. Click on File, Save, then File, Run Map, and click OK. Let's talk about bats. I'm sure you all know they use echolocation to navigate, but did you know how accurate it is? They can navigate to avoid objects as thin as a piece of thread. I guess we're missing out by not having echolocation, but then it's not like we need even more excuses to screech at each other. What I like most about bats is that they eat so many insects. They can eat up to 1,000 insects an hour. On a personal note, I really hate bugs. Anything that kills them is fine by me. Okay, whoops, I forgot to change the start location, but that's no big deal. We'll just walk over and check out these cups. Looks pretty good. Notice how he's still playing his idling animations. And Chuck over here is working too. And now look, all the others are looking at them because they're jealous. Okay, on to the final segment. Okay, this is the last lesson in the tutorial. The format of this one is going to be different than how we've done things so far. Up until now, we've been creating everything from scratch or building off of previous work. Here, I'm not going to create anything new for this one. Instead, we're going to look at a scene straight out of Galaxy Gulp and dissect it. I'm going to try and explain everything that's happening here so you get a better idea of how this all works together. And to make it a little more interesting, we're going to cover the scene where the dwarf gets shot out of the cannon. So let's launch Hammer and we'll get started. Oh, and this isn't going to be exactly the same as the movie, but that's only because we had to remove one or two models to avoid possible copyright problems. It still functions identically. Alright, go to File, Open, and we're going to need GG-Cannon Shot. Okay, let's get a better view here. Now as you can see, there's a lot going on here compared to the previous segments, but we'll take this one step at a time. A lot of this occurs as one big sequence, so when you activate the trigger in the game, the whole scene plays out. So before we get to that, I want to cover what you're seeing as soon as you start the map. Let's zoom in here a bit. You may have noticed all these shiny balls floating around here. You don't have to worry about them. These are called environment cube maps. What they do is help create more accurate lighting by sampling what the world looks like around them, then reflecting it as necessary. This is strictly a mapping thing. It won't affect anything aside from lighting. And on that note, let's take a look at these floating light bulbs here. As you might guess, these are light sources. Now we do have some light coming in from the sky, but for everything else, that's what these are here for. And if we back up a bit, you'll see another form of lighting called a light spot, which is a dyslexic way of saying a spotlight. The regular light entities will emit light in every direction. These will point it in a focused area, so it's used to light up the cup here, the street lamp here, the station lights, etc. Now you may get confused by seeing these really bright, glowing sections in the map and think that they're light sources too. However, if you get close and click on one of them, you can see they're an entity called an environment sprite, which displays a 2D image in 3D space. They don't give off any light by themselves. But this is all stuff left for a mapping tutorial. I'm just making sure you're not in the dark. Ah! That's another pun! I can't believe I did that. I said I wasn't going to. That was a total coincidence. I'll have to commit seppuku like a disgraced samurai if I do it again. Alright, let's see what else we have. Here's our dragon, obviously. If you click on him, you can see he's just a dynamic prop. If you double click, it'll show what else he's doing in the game. Go to default animation, and notice it says idle. Now if you click on the model tab, you can see what it'll be doing. So he's just chilling there getting ready for liftoff. If you want, you can take a look at a couple of the other animations. Like here's him breathing heavily, and of course the flyaway sequence at the end. Alright, I'm going to close this. Again, it doesn't matter what position they're in when you preview the animation. It won't affect things in-game. I don't think we ended up showing him in this particular scene because of the camera work, but he was already there prior to this and is in the scene following afterwards, so we may as well have him. There's another prop like this too, the guy loitering outside the store against the pole. If you double click on him, you can see he's just a dynamic prop too. And the default animation here is lean left. Now I would show you what this looks like in the model tab, but this can get messed up if you've just viewed another model like we have, so we'll pass for now. Okay, let's close this. And the next thing I want to show you is this giant walk path circling the map here. This is actually left over from earlier scenes. It's what the antlion uses to walk around in the background. He didn't appear in every shot, but he's walking around constantly in Galaxy Gulp. Let's see if we can find him here. Oh, okay. He's out back behind the building. That must mean I wanted him out of the way for this scene, otherwise I would have put him closer to the path. For most of the scenes, I would have had him start on various points around this path. If you look over here, you can see some of the entities I used to control him. See, here's his AI scripted schedule, Antlion Brain, and that sent him on the Antlion run paths that loop around here. And none of the other NPCs like the Antlions, so you can see I have a whole bunch of AI relationships that keep them from attacking each other. If we double click here, you can see this one is to keep it from attacking the player. And this one is used to keep them friendly with the Metro Cops. You get the idea. And we have more AI relationships scattered around the level here. This is where the Combine soldiers were standing, so I have some AI relationships for them here. And if we go inside the store here, there are a few more for the different characters. See, there are different NPCs here. The Vortigaunt, the Cop, Alex, the Combine soldier still. Actually, this is one of the samurai, but the game will see it as a Combine soldier. So the more NPCs you have, the more AI relationships you'll need to make sure everyone plays nice. Oh, and you can see there's another trigger here, but all this does is open the doors when people walk in or out. Let's see, what else? Oh, the giant rotating cup. This really belongs more in a mapping tutorial, but just so you know, this uses a physics motor entity, and that controls a plate here at the bottom which the cup is attached to. The cup itself is another dynamic prop. Well, I think that wraps up everything that's going on in this map before we actually start the scene. It has a lot more props and NPCs, but it's basically the same thing we've been working with already. Now let's go step by step over what happens when we activate the trigger. Okay, if you look over here, you can see our player's start location. So this trigger I have in front of him is what's going to make everything happen. So let's double click on that. Now go to Outputs. Now you can see I have a whole bunch of events occurring when you walk over this. And notice under the delay column, I have different events occurring at different times. This lets me activate many events in the right order, all in one step. So we'll go ahead and follow this in order. The first thing that happens when I walk over this is that I have an entity named UFO starting forward. This is the Turbo Cheese ship taking off. Let's close this window and we'll take a look at it. Here you can see the ship on its side over here. Now you might think this is the UFO, but if you click on it, you can see I named this ship, and it's actually a dynamic prop. To take a look at what the trigger is pointing at, I'm going to use the camera tool so we can dive inside this thing. There, you see that magenta box there? That's what we want. And if you click on it, you can see the name, UFO. This is the train that moves the UFO up. Now if you double click on it, you can see the first target here is Landing 1. So let's go and find that. Landing 1 is right over here. And if you look up, there's Landing 2. So this is a simple track. The UFO just goes straight up. This is also the reason why the UFO is lying on its side the way it is. This is just like what we learned earlier. We're using the train to move this object. And I can tell you right now, there was a lot of trial and error with lining this up right. I had to make sure it was the right height so it didn't go through the floor, hover above the ground, was facing the right way, etc. So these things are kind of a pain to set up, but they get the job done. Now let's see what's next on our list. Go and double click on the trigger again. Back to outputs. And we have a couple different things happening at the 2-second mark. Let's look at the entity named Spark first. This is the fuse for the cannon sparking before it actually fires. Close this, then head over to the back here. Now the first thing you may notice is that the cannon isn't in the right place. This is because it's on a train track too. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So the sparks are actually where the fuse to the cannon is going to show up. Things like this are the reason I'm not creating this from scratch again. There's a dozen or so little adjustments that were fine-tuned to create this movie here that would take forever to do again. If you double click on the spark, you'll see that there's not a whole lot in the way of options. Just an entity that sparks. However, if we head back to the trigger over here, you can look at all the inputs possible for this entity. So double click on it, go to outputs, and the command we have is start spark. If you go to the drop-down menu, you can see your other options. Most of these we don't have a use for, but at the bottom you can see there are ones related to sparking. I don't have time to go over every entity in Hammer, but for a lot of your special effects like this, you can usually figure out what to put for the input just from looking at the names. Alright, let's see what's next. It says the entity bystander 1 is going to start. That start input means that this is a scene file, so let's go take a look at that. The scene file here is used to animate the crowd inside the store. See, here's bystander 1, and if you double click on it, you can get some more information about it. If you click on the input tab here, it will tell you the names of any entities sending input to it. See right here, there's our trigger that we'll be walking over, telling this to start. And if you go back to the class info tab, you can see which scene file this will be using. I've actually cleaned this part up from the original map. Since we created so many scene files during the rest of the tutorial, all the scene files from the actual movie will have the prefix GG- to prevent confusion. Okay, so this scene controls part of the crowd, and I think this one right here controls the rest of them. Let's go back to the trigger and see what's next. So double click on that, go to outputs, and it looks like the next thing to start is the scene file called Samurai Fight. That's in that row with the others, but let's take a quick look at our samurai here. I'll use the camera tool for this. Okay, these are our samurai. You'll notice they're just combined soldiers in Hammer here, but that's because they're using that same trick we used on the Turbo Chi earlier. They're also facing back to back like they're in a pistol duel. However, that's because of how their animations are positioned for them. Believe it or not, this actually lines up correctly once the animation starts playing. The scene file is what's going to show them slap fighting prior to the impact from the dwarf. Alright, let's check our trigger again. Double click on it, outputs. And next is an entity called Dwarf Shout, and it's being told to play sound. Let's close this and I'll show you what this is about. This is controlling an entity we haven't covered yet called an ambient generic. These are used to play sound files in the game. If you double click on it, you can see the options it has. Besides the name, the main value you want to pay attention to is the sound name. This tells you what sound file to play. We have D-Fire up here since that sound file has already been entered into the game's scripts. If you click on Browse, you can see all the sound files you have available. Okay, actually this looks like a mess. I'm not sure what's happening. Let's scroll down a bit. Yeah, this is better. This is what your list of sound files normally looks like. I don't know why our custom ones are all bunched together. It wasn't always like this. There's obviously some sort of bug going on here. I'm not sure what. So maybe Browse isn't the best option. Let's close this. If you run into this sort of problem, just do like I've already done here and type in the name of the file you want manually. This won't always play back in Hammer, but I've already tested this and it plays back in the game. And there are other options here like volume and pitch control, but I usually fiddle with that sort of thing in editing. And if you go to flags, there are a few options that are pretty self-explanatory. So close this. And now we'll know to hear a dwarf shout just before the cannon fires. Okay, let's see what's next. Go back to our trigger again. It looks like we have a whole bunch of things happening at 4 seconds after it fires. Let's take these one at a time. Now the first output here is to tell the spark to stop. We already looked at this entity, so let's move on to the next one. Next, we're telling a train to start forward. I admit I could have named this better, but what this is referring to is the train that's going to move the spinning dwarf towards the window. We'll have to go around to the back of the building to see this. And there's our train right next to the model of the singed dwarf. This is how the dwarf gets propelled out of the cannon. I originally wanted to make him a physics object and fling him towards the window, but his behavior got too erratic, so we had to use this instead. Go ahead and double click on it. You'll see here the first stop target is named track. So to see this, let's close this window and head back out to the front again. And there it is, track. This is the path he'll be following out of the cannon. Now let's head to the back of the building again since there's more stuff to show you. If you double click on the dwarf, you can see he's just a dynamic prop. And notice his parent is the train. If you scroll down, look under default animation. As you can guess from the name, this is what's going to put him in the cannonball pose. And I'm going to risk previewing the animation to hope it turns out correctly. So we'll go to the Model tab. And there it is. This looks a little choppy because I'm recording, but it's actually pretty smooth. Now you may have noticed there's another new entity over here that we should cover, an environment fire. This is what makes him look like he's on fire when he's being shot out of the cannon. If you double click on it, you get a few parameters. Notice how the parent is Cannonball, which is what I named the spinning dwarf model. So the fire is parented to the dwarf, which is parented to the train. So everything is moving relative to this train. All aboard. Okay, that about covers how our dwarf is going to be shot out of the cannon. Let's head back over to the trigger to see what's next. Okay, next the cannonball is being told to turn on. I guess that means we're not done with this after all. What this command does is tell the object to become visible again. Let's close this for a second. If you look over here, this is where the train and the dwarf are going to appear when the map starts. However, that's a problem because we don't want them to appear until the cannon fires. So what I did was use a logic auto entity to tell the dwarf to start off invisible. Go and double click on it here, then go to Outputs. See? On map spawn, cannonball, turn off. Turn off tells the prop to become invisible. So when the trigger is telling it to turn on, that means it's reappearing because it's ready to be fired. Alright, let's look at the trigger again. Double click on it, Outputs. Now the next entity in line is the environment fire we looked at earlier. The input here is start fire, which is pretty self-explanatory. If you look at the different options for the fire entity, the main ones that jump out are start fire and extinguish. So if you know which entity you need, you can usually figure out how to activate it. Our next entity is named Boom and is set to explode. This points to an environment explosion entity which you can see over here. If you double click on it, you can see a few of the parameters you have. You can change the size, the appearance, etc. Now I realize I'm glossing over this, but remember, if I don't do this, then the tutorial will never end. There's a lot to learn in Hammer, but let's continue going over what's here. Double click on the trigger again. Our next entity in line is named Cannon Train. This is the train for our cannon, telling it to start forward. Now if you've ever fired a live cannon at your neighbors, you'll know that the cannon doesn't just stay still right after it fires. It's going to kick back pretty hard. Isaac Newton could tell you that. So what I did is have the cannon jolt backwards right after it fires, which is what this train is here for. And if we zoom inside the cannon, there's our train. Now double click on it. Now see that our first stop target here is cannon track. So let's close this and take a look at that. See, there's cannon track and cannon track 1. The cannon doesn't go very far. I just didn't want it to be completely still after shooting a dwarf out of it. Alright, let's see what's next for our trigger. Ah, only one more. This is telling the entity Crowd 2 to start. This is the name for a logic choreographed scene that we can go take a look at inside the store. If you double click on it, you can see the scene file it's pointing to, and that's about all we're going to cover here. This is controlling the crowd behavior before and after the impact from the cannon. Now you may be wondering why I have 3 separate scene files here when I can control all the characters with just one. The reason for this is because whenever one of your characters dies, it immediately stops the rest of the scene in its tracks. Now we're not actually killing people in the movie, but in order to get everyone to knock over, we need to tell Hammer to kill some of the NPCs who are in the line of fire. So we're going to be killing several NPCs here. So if this was all part of one scene, then the scene file would end and it wouldn't play the rest of it for the ones that are still alive. So by splitting the scenes up, you can still kill characters without ruining the entire scene as a whole. That's a handy tip to know. So, speaking of killing people, let me show you how that's going to work. I guess skip this if you're squeamish or something. Now we're done with our trigger, but the sequence of events isn't over yet. Our dwarf is going to be traveling along this path here. This is all pretty simple until we get to this point at the window here, then it gets more complicated. Go and double click on this path track here. Now go to Outputs. Notice how this entity has all these values of onPass here. This is a function I probably should have mentioned earlier, but we'll go over it now instead. Both path tracks and path corners have the option of outputting a command when a train or an NPC passes through them. So I'm actually using these points in the track as an extra trigger to continue the events for this scene. Now for these first values I have window 1 set to shatter and window 2 set to break. It's not hard to guess what I'm doing with these. One problem I noticed when creating this scene was that the window wouldn't always smash when the dwarf crashed into it. So rather than leave that to chance, I made sure they would break when the dwarf got close enough by using these commands here. I have 2 commands because I'm actually using 2 different types of windows here, so there will be more glass. I'm not going to go over the differences between them, but I will point out where they are. Here's the first one, window 1, and if you go around to the back, this is window 2. Now you'll notice this no draw texture painted all over it. That's just another specialty texture that tells Hammer not to draw anything on this surface when you're looking at it inside the game. It's needed for some windows. So all you really need to know here is that these windows are going to break when the dwarf moves over that path track. Okay, let's see what's next. Go and double click on that same path track, then go to Outputs again. And notice here I have commands for the 2 samurai to set their health to 0. This will kill the samurai and allow them to get knocked over. So we're creating the illusion that it's the dwarf knocking them over, when in reality we're using a kill switch. The dwarf's train will still run into them, however, which makes for a more realistic looking collision. Alright, close this window, and we'll go ahead and move on to the next track point. It's inside the store here, named Track 5. Double click on it and go to Outputs again. Okay, what's happening here is we're just activating more kill switches. These names on the left are the names of the different NPCs standing in the way. So when the train passes through here, these NPCs will all collapse at slightly different time intervals, so it looks like the dwarf is causing it. If you want to close the window here, you can click on them to see who's who. Bystander, Fodder 1, Fodder 3, Fodder 2. It's going to look like the dwarf is knocking them all over. Alright, the next thing that's going to happen is that it'll run into all these chips. This is entirely a physics-based collision, and it's going to be really choppy in the game, but you can record it later so it plays smoothly. If you click on one of the chips, I actually have these items grouped together. I'm going to ungroup them temporarily by selecting them and pressing Ctrl U. Alternately, you can group any items in Hammer together by selecting them and pressing Ctrl G. Now if I click on this again, it's a smaller group now, so I may have to do this a couple times. I grouped these bags of chips together several times so I wouldn't have to position every single bag individually. Okay, now we're down to just one. If you double click on one of the bags, then go to Flags, and you can see the box Start Asleep is checked. This means that these bags won't move until something bumps into them, like a flaming dwarf. You can go ahead and close this, and I'm going to hit Ctrl Z a few times to put them back in their groups. Ctrl Z will undo any of your recent actions in Hammer. Okay, so after he crashes into the chips, let's follow the path to see what happens next. Oh, this is worth noting. This entity here looks like an info target, but it's actually a physics ragdoll magnet. What this does is draw any ragdoll bodies towards it. So when those NPCs collapse, they're going to be drawn towards this entity to an extent. I did this so that it looks like the dwarf is really slamming into them rather than just knocking them aside. If you double click on it here, you can go to the force value and specify how strong a pull you want, and it gives you a sense of scale in the description. Alright, go ahead and close this. And let's look at the remaining path tracks and see what they do. I'll double click on this one, go to Outputs, and this one doesn't do anything. It's just another point in the path. So let's close this one and look at the last one. Double click on it. Outputs. Here we go. Okay, our first command is cannonball, kill. Fire, kill. Now when you tell Hammer to kill an entity like this, it doesn't mess around. It removes it entirely from the map. It's like it never existed. So when this dwarf reaches the end of the destination, he's just going to vanish. That's because I don't want a flaming dwarf just spinning there in the corner of the store. What I do want is the dwarf to look like he's getting up off the ground. That brings us to our next output here. We have an entity named Beam, and we're going to tell it to teleport. This is for an entity called a point teleport. Let's close this window and take a look at it. It's this purple cube right above the scorch mark here. This is used to teleport other entities to where it's located. Go and double click on it, and see the value here, entity to teleport, and we have burnt dwarf. And if you head back behind the building, here's our burnt dwarf. This is an actual NPC because we're going to want him to play a scene file of him getting up and looking around. So when the point teleport entity is activated, he'll teleport in no matter where he is. Now let's look at that last path track again. Oops, wrong one. Go and double click on it. And the last output is for an entity named Crispy to start. This is the name for the logic choreographed scene to start the dwarf after he teleports in. And you can double click on it here and see the scene file it's pointing to. So, that covers this map. Let's go back over it quick. When we walk over the trigger, the UFO is going to fly straight up, then the sparks will start, the dwarf will shout fire, an explosion will occur, the cannon will jolt backwards, the spinning dwarf on fire will fly out of it, he'll follow along this path here, it will cause the window to smash, cause a bunch of NPCs to get knocked over, cause the chips to get knocked everywhere. Then once it reaches the end, it will disappear, an NPC of the dwarf will teleport in, and start his scene. It's like some giant Rube Goldberg machine. Alright, let's run this sucker. Go to File. We don't really need to save since we haven't changed anything. Run Map. And because we have all the light sources and everything we need, we'll actually go ahead and do a full rad rendering for this map. So I'm going to change this to normal. Then press OK. Now don't think I'm going to talk the whole time this compiles. I'm going to edit through this and simply show you how long it took. It's going to take a little while, and this is a relatively simple map actually. Okay, here we go. I'm skipping ahead. Okay, you see that? 4 minutes, 25 seconds. That's how long it took to figure out the light. This is why we don't do previews with RAD on. Okay, now it's loading. You know in science fiction movies how they always have computers with great artificial intelligence? We're not even close to that. I mean, we can get them to recognize patterns really well and do complex tasks, but a computer you can have a conversation with? Forget it. When it comes down to it, computers are dumb. I mean, look at everything we had to do just to tell it to run this scene. I don't think we're going to see truly intelligent computers in our lifetime. So if you're worried about getting conquered by robots, don't be. Okay, this is going to happen quick, so keep your eyes open. The UFO takes off. The sparks start. Fire! There he goes. It's super choppy. Teleported in. And now he's running a scene. And our shelf is possessed by demons. Looks good. Alright, that's it people. Tutorial's over. Watch the conclusion if you want. Welcome to the conclusion. You don't actually have to do anything here. Not that you really had to in the other sections, but that was kind of the idea. I'm guessing by now you're feeling one of two ways. You're probably eager to make your own movies now, or else you never want to look at the software development kit again because you didn't realize what you were getting into. I can appreciate both sides. Either way, you made it this far and you're a better person for it. Or at least I hope. So the big question is, where do you go from here? To reiterate, this tutorial is not the ultimate all-encompassing guide to the Source engine. We didn't cover every single thing you can do in Source because that's a tall order. So don't email me after this telling me I forgot something. I'm sure I did somewhere. I tried to cover everything important. I'm still learning what's possible with the engine myself. I think the same could be said for almost anyone who works with it. On that note, if you decide you want to do more than what I've taught here, you have some options. Again, this tutorial is meant to complement the cinematography and source guide. So if you find you need help putting the rest of your machinima together, that's what you should look at next. I personally recommend expanding your knowledge of Hammer. It will allow you to pull off more tricks with your machinima and tailor your environment better. As you can guess, Noesis has a guide for this too called Advanced Level Design. I don't narrate that one, but I'm sure the other guy manages. And if you want to do more with custom animations or props, there's a slew of guides on that put out by Noesis. Just figure out which one you need. Now this all may seem like a lot of work, and it is, but it has some payoff too. The Source engine is going to be around for some time to come. Valve's become a major player in the gaming world, and naturally they're going to ride their own engine out as far as they can. And while we focused on Half-Life 2, especially Episode 1, don't feel constrained by it. I'd guess 80 to 90% of what's taught in this guide carries over from one Source game to the next. Besides the Half-Life 2 series, there have already been third-party games for Source to come out, like Sin Episodes or Dark Messiah of Might and Magic. And there's even more coming out on the horizon. If you like zombies, you're in luck. Valve is going to be releasing a zombie survival game called Left 4 Dead, and a smaller developer is going to be releasing They Hunger Lost Souls, which will be the sequel to the zombie survival game for Half-Life 1. There's also a tactical combat game called The Crossing coming out. Postal 3, a shooter with outrageous dark comedy, will be using the Source engine. And in what may be the weirdest looking game I've seen in years, the game Xenoclash is another one to look for. And there's even more games that use Source that are still in development. Now this may all be old news by the time you're watching this, but the point is that you can get some mileage out of learning this engine. Finally, if you do make any machinima after using this guide, Noesis wants to know about it. You can email info@noesisinteractive.com. It would be great to see someone actually use this for their own work, rather than just us keeping our fingers crossed and wondering. And I'm sure I'll regret saying this later, but if you went through this whole guide and still have a question about something that was covered, you can track me down personally and I'll probably answer your question. I encourage that as a last resort option, however. Okay, well I hope you learned something from this and can use it to make your own movies. Good luck!